Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was an adventurer without a Falna, a true sage F the wild Naruto x Ryuu lion DanMachi. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The sound of a falling leaf. The silence of the 34th floor was a living thing. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence of immense, geological weight. It was the quiet of eons, of stone that had never known the sun. Of life that had evolved in absolute darkness and pressure. The air itself was a thick, humid blanket, heavy with the scent of damp earth, ozone, and a faint, cloying sweetness like rotting fruit and blooming nightshade. Water, weeping from unseen fissures in the cavern's colossal ceiling, dripped with a rhythmic persistence that was the sole metronome of this sunless world. Each drop struck the phosphorescent moss below with a soft chime, the sound echoing for a moment before being swallowed by the oppressive quiet once more. To any other adventurer, it would have been a hell of sensory deprivation and creeping paranoia. To Naruto Uzumaki, it was a symphony. He sat with his back against a pillar of black, crystalline rock, utterly still. His eyes were closed, but he saw everything. He was not merely sitting in the environment. He was the environment. This was the gift, the secret, the very essence of his existence, sage mode. It was a state of being that the gods of this world, with their finite blessings and transactional power, could never bestow. It was a perfect, harmonious union with the natural world, and down here, in the deep, raw heart of the planet, the world's energy was potent and pure. Through the soles of his soft, durable boots, he felt the lifeblood of the rock, the slow, tectonic pulse of the dungeon itself. He felt the network of roots from the glowing flora, a silent conversation of chemical signals. He felt the skittering of 1,000 crystal-shelled insects in the cracks and crevices, their tiny life forces like sparks in the dark. He tasted the subtle shift in the air currents, mapping the labyrinthine tunnels for kilometers in every direction. His perception was not a cone of vision, but a sphere of absolute awareness. And within this sphere, he was hunting. His quarry was a creature of myth even to the most seasoned adventurers, a being spoken of in hushed tones in the guild's deepest archives, a grave lurker. It was a predator that had mastered the art of non-existence. It did not hunt with claw or fang in the conventional sense, it hunted with silence and shadow, a living void that consumed life. For 3 days, he had tracked it, not by sight or sound, but by the subtle disturbances it left in the natural energy of the dungeon, a cold spot in the flow, a momentary dimming of the world's life force. His target was not the beast itself, but what grew within it. The luminous sarcophagus, a fist-sized crystal that was said to form around the monster's heart, a unique geological formation created by the immense pressure and magical energy the creature absorbed over its centuries-long lifespan. It was an alchemical component of unparalleled potency, capable of stabilizing volatile potions that would otherwise detonate, or serving as a power source for enchantments of the highest order. For Naruto, it was the final ingredient he needed to create a preservation seal of such strength that it could keep organic materials in perfect stasis for decades, an invention he'd been perfecting for his solitary life. A flicker, a dissonance. There, to his west, 973 meters away, the natural energy wavered. It was the barest of tells, a ripple so faint that any other living thing would have missed it. It was the lurker. It had found prey, and in the moment of its projected attack, its concentration had slipped. Naruto's eyes snapped open, revealing irises of the deepest cerulean, now with the horizontal, toad-like pupils that marked his sage state. The faint orange pigmentation around his eyes was the only outward sign of the immense power coursing through him. He rose in a single, fluid motion that was utterly silent. The gravel at his feet did not shift. The air did not stir. He was a falling leaf, a wisp of smoke, a part of the natural order that did not announce its presence. From a sealed pouch at his waist, he retrieved 3 custom-made kunai. The blades were forged from a dark, non-reflective alloy he had smelted himself, and the metal was cold to the touch, imbued with a chakra-conductive property that made them an extension of his will. He moved, not with the hurried pace of a hunter closing in, but with the patient, inexorable gait of fate itself. He flowed through the twisting corridors of the dungeon, his feet never making a sound on the crystal-littered floor. The glowing moss cast long, dancing shadows, but he moved within them, becoming one with the gloom. His sage sense gave him a perfect, three-dimensional map of the terrain ahead, allowing him to navigate the treacherous landscape with an impossible grace. He leapt a chasm 20 meters wide, landing on the other side as gently as a dandelion seed. He scaled a vertical rock face by channeling a minute amount of chakra to his feet, adhering to the surface for a few crucial seconds. These were not the flashy, world-shaking techniques of his youth. This was mastery, refined by decades of survival into an art form of sublime efficiency. As he drew closer, the scene resolved itself in his mind's eye. A lesser cavern, dominated by a forest of towering, violet-hued crystals. The lurker's prey was a small herd of rock-eaters, armored, six-legged beasts contentedly grinding shards of crystal between their powerful mandibles. They were oblivious, their simple minds incapable of perceiving the sophisticated predator that stalked them. The grave lurker was a horror of biological design. It was a vaguely reptilian quadruped, nearly 3 meters long, but its form seemed to shimmer and distort at the edges. Its hide was not black, but a perfect absence of light, a patch of mobile emptiness that absorbed the faint glow of the cavern. It had no discernible eyes or mouth, only a smooth, featureless head. Its method of attack was insidious. It projected a field of concentrated shadow, a tangible darkness that didn't just block light but also dampened sound and thermal energy. To its prey, the world would simply cease to be for a moment. And in that moment, the lurker would strike, its claws, sharp as obsidian shards, appearing from the void to deliver a single, fatal blow. Naruto found his perch on a high ledge overlooking the cavern, melting into the deep shadow cast by a massive crystal formation. He was downwind, his scent masked by low-level chakra shrew that mimicked the smell of the surrounding rock and moss. Patience was a virtue he had learned the hard way, beaten into him by a world that did not suffer fools or the impatient. He watched, his breathing slow and even, his heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. He analyzed the lurker's movements, the subtle twitch of its formless limbs, the way the energy field around it contracted and expanded. He was looking for a pattern, a weakness, a single point of failure in its seemingly perfect predatory design. There, a faint pulse emanated from its chest every 23 seconds. A rhythmic release of excess energy. A biological exhaust port. That was the location of the sarcophagus. And the moment of that release was the only time its shadowy cloak wavered, even if only for a fraction of a second. That was his window. The lurker moved, a flowing patch of midnight that detached itself from the cavern wall. It glided towards the unsuspecting rock-eaters. Naruto's muscles tensed, not with anxiety, but with anticipation. He drew a deep breath, pulling in the rich natural energy of the dungeon, feeling it flood his cells, sharpening his senses to a razor's edge. The shadow field expanded, engulfing the nearest rock-eater. The creature's low grinding sound was abruptly cut off. The air grew cold. Naruto's hand moved, a blur of motion. A kunai was in his grip, its tip pointed downwards. He didn't throw it, he dropped it. The blade fell, silent and true, gathering speed. Just as it left his hand, he performed a single hand seal, ram, and pulsed a minuscule thread of wind chakra into the kunai's handle. It wasn't a powerful gust, but a precise surgical application of force, altering the kunai's trajectory by a mere 3 degrees to the left, compensating for a faint air current he had sensed. The lurker's claws emerged from the void, poised to strike the paralyzed rock-eater. The energy pulse emanated from its chest. Its shadow shroud flickered. The kunai arrived at that exact microsecond. It did not make the sound of metal striking hide. It made a soft, wet thump. The blade, empowered by Naruto's chakra, slipped between the creature's armored plates as if they were paper, sinking to the hilt directly into the source of the energy pulse. The grave lurker froze. Its shadow field collapsed violently, imploding with a deafening whoosh of displaced air that sent dust and crystal shards flying. The creature convulsed once, its true form revealed for a fleeting moment, a sleek, panther-like body covered in interlocking plates of glossy black chitin. Then, it fell to the ground, utterly still. The remaining rock-eaters, startled by the sudden noise, scattered into the darkness. Silence returned to the cavern, heavier than before. Naruto dropped from his perch, landing silently beside the dead monstrosity. He spared a brief, respectful glance at the beast. It was a perfect product of its environment, a master of its domain. There was no joy in the kill, only a quiet acknowledgement of the cycle of life and death that governed the wilds. He knelt, placing a hand on the creature's flank. With precise chakra control, he sent a thin, sharp blade of wind from his fingertips, cutting a neat, circular incision into the creature's chest. The hide was tougher than steel, but his chakra blade parted it with ease. Reaching inside, his fingers brushed against something smooth, hard, and pulsing with a faint internal light. He carefully extracted it. The luminous sarcophagus sat in his palm, a breathtaking sight. It was a flawless, multifaceted crystal, clear as glass, but with a soft, white light swirling at its core, like a captured nebula. It pulsed with a gentle warmth, resonating with the energy of the dungeon. His mission was complete. He placed it carefully into a purpose-built, velvet-lined box, which he then tucked into a seal on the inside of his vest. A quick, efficient process. He was about to harvest a few of the lurker's chitinous plates. They would make excellent lightweight armor reinforcements, when his entire world tilted. His sage mode, a calm ocean of sensory input, was suddenly hit by a tidal wave. A maelstrom of raw, desperate energy erupted 5 caverns to the south. It was a cacophony of emotions. Fear, yes, but beneath it, a bedrock of cold, defiant fury. He felt the spike of adrenaline, the burn of dwindling stamina, and the unbending will of a cornered predator. It was a single life force, bright and sharp like a shard of ice, surrounded by a dozen others that were wrong. They were monstrous, certainly, but their energy was tainted, corrupted with a sickly violet hue that felt like a festering wound in the natural order. They moved with an unnatural coordination, a hive-mind intelligence that was alien to the chaotic nature of dungeon monsters. Naruto's head snapped up, his gaze distant. His personal mission was over, but this was something else. This was a violation. The wilds had their own brutal, beautiful logic. This was a sickness. He wasn't a hero. The world had beaten that naive notion out of his previous life. He was a survivor, a pragmatist. Getting involved was illogical. It was dangerous. It invited complication into his carefully ordered existence. He sighed, a soft puff of air in the cavern's gloom. But he was also the only one here who could feel the wrongness of it all, the discordant note in the symphony. To ignore it felt like ignoring a part of himself. With a final glance at the dead lurker, he sealed the rest of the corpse into a large storage scroll to deal with later. Waste not, want not. Then, he moved, becoming a blur of motion that streaked through the dark tunnels, his calm, cerulean eyes now holding a glint of cold steel. Complication had just found him. The sounds of battle reached him long before he arrived. The high-pitched shriek of metal on chitin, the guttural roars of beasts, and the sharp, musical crack of what sounded like magic. When he reached the edge of the final cavern, he slowed, pressing himself into the shadows of the entrance and letting his sage sense paint the picture. The cavern was vast, a natural amphitheater littered with broken pillars of rock. The source of light was a blanket of the same glowing moss, but here it cast a pale, eerie green glow over the scene. In the center, her back to a sheer wall of rock, was a woman. She was an elf. That much was clear from the faint point of her ears peeking through her forest green hair, which was matted with sweat and grime. She wore practical, dark leather armor over a green tunic, all of it scuffed, torn, and stained. She held 2 short swords, their blades a swirl of deadly motion that kept her attackers at bay. She was grace and lethality personified, moving with the fluid economy of a master warrior. A feint here, a parry there, a quick, brutal thrust that sank into a monster's eye socket. She was magnificent, and she was losing. Her opponents were a pack of hellhounds, but like the energy he had sensed. They were twisted versions of the genuine article. Their fur was patchy and matted, their bodies covered in pulsing, violet glowing veins. Their eyes, normally pits of crimson flame, burned with that same sickly purple light. They were faster, stronger, and unnervingly intelligent, flanking her, testing her defenses, coordinating their attacks. For every one she cut down, 2 more would lunge. Her breathing was ragged, each gasp a plume of white in the chill air. A deep gash bled freely from her left bicep, staining her sleeve a dark crimson. Her movements, while still precise, were becoming smaller. More defensive. One of the hounds feinted high, and as she moved to block, another lunged low, its jaws snapping shut on the blade of her right-hand sword. With a wrenching twist, the weapon was torn from her grasp, skittering across the stone floor. Now armed with only one sword, she was forced into a desperate retreat, her back pressing hard against the cold stone wall. A flicker of something crossed her face, not fear, but a grim, fatalistic acceptance. She tightened her grip on her remaining sword, her knuckles white, ready to sell her life as dearly as possible. Naruto had seen enough. The corruption tainting these beasts felt profoundly wrong, and the elf's will to fight resonated with a part of him he thought long buried. He didn't announce himself. There was no grand speech. No heroic declaration. That was the stuff of stories, of the foolish boy he once was. He was a man now, and men of the wilds knew that survival was predicated on efficiency. He simply acted. From the shadow of the tunnel entrance, he moved. To the elf, Ryuu lion, one moment the hellhounds were closing in for the kill, a wall of slavering jaws and purple glowing eyes. The next, a whisper of motion, a flicker of black and gray, was among them. It wasn't a fight, it was a dismantling. Naruto's taijutsu was a thing of terrifying beauty, a dance of brutal physics. He flowed between the hounds like water. His first strike was an open palm thrust to the side of a leaping beast's ribcage. There was a sickening crack of breaking bone, and the creature was sent tumbling end over end, crashing into two of its pack mates. He didn't stop. He pivoted on his heel, his legs sweeping out in a low arc, shattering the front legs of another hound. As it fell, his hand chopped down in a precise, knife-hand strike to the back of its neck, silencing it permanently. He moved with a preternatural understanding of anatomy and momentum. A finger jabbed to a pressure point behind a hound's jaw, causing its muscles to seize. A spinning kick that connected with the temple of another, sending it crashing into the cavern wall with enough force to crack the stone. It was all done with a calm, detached focus. His face an impassive mask. He was a force of nature, as impersonal and as unstoppable as an avalanche. Ryuu could only watch, her one remaining sword held forgotten at her side. Her mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. This man, this boy, he couldn't be much older than she was, wore no heavy armor, wielded no visible weapon of note, and chanted no spells. Why? Yet he moved with a speed that made a high-level adventurer look sluggish, his strikes landing with a concussive force that seemed impossible for his lean frame. Within 30 seconds, only 3 of the corrupted hounds remained. They backed away, their unnatural intelligence recognizing a threat far beyond their capacity. They snarled, violet foam dripping from their jaws, and for the first time, they seemed hesitant. Naruto stopped, standing in the center of the carnage, a still point in the storm. He raised a single hand, his index and middle fingers extended. He didn't even look at the beasts. He was looking at the violet energy pulsing beneath their hides. Futon. Repusho, he whispered, the words a soft puff of air. It was not a command shouted at the world, but a quiet instruction to it. A compressed shell of wind, invisible to the naked eye, erupted from his hand. It wasn't a gale or a tornado, it was a focused, concussive blast. The 3 remaining hellhounds were lifted from their feet as if struck by a giant's fist, sent flying backwards to smash against the far wall of the cavern with bone-jarring finality. They slid to the floor in crumpled, broken heaps. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the steady drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling. Naruto stood amidst the bodies, his posture relaxed. He took a slow, deliberate breath, and the faint, orange pigmentation around his eyes faded, his pupils returning to their normal, round shape. The immense, oppressive presence of his sage mode receded, leaving behind the calm aura of the man himself. He turned his head slowly, his cerulean eyes finally meeting Ryu's wide, aquamarine ones. He took in her defensive stance, the unwavering point of her sword, the suspicion and awe warring in her gaze. His eyes flickered from her face to the dead hounds, a thoughtful expression on his face. They were corrupted, he said, his voice calm and even, yet it seemed to carry in the vast cavern. It was not the voice of a young man, but one that held an ancient, weary weight. Their energy was twisted, unnatural. Ryu's arm did not waver. Her training, her instincts, everything screamed at her that the man before her was infinitely more dangerous than the beasts he had just slaughtered. His power was alien, his methods incomprehensible. That doesn't answer the question, she stated, her voice a low, steady alto, betraying none of the turmoil she felt. Who are you? Naruto's gaze shifted from the monsters to her, his eyes lingering for a moment on the bleeding gash on her bicep. You're injured, he observed, his tone matter of fact. He took a step towards her. Instinctively, she tensed, her sword tip jabbing forward slightly. Stay back. He stopped, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. There was no offense in his posture, only a quiet patience that was, in its own way, unnerving. That wound is deep. The claws of those things were tainted. Leaving it to fester down here is a death sentence. She knew he was right. She could already feel a strange coldness spreading from the gash, a sign of poison or worse. A high-grade potion might counteract it, but she was fresh out, having used her last one an hour ago. Still, the idea of letting this enigma near her was unthinkable. I can manage, she said, her pride and suspicion winning out over pragmatism. Naruto simply looked at her, his blue eyes holding a disconcerting amount of understanding. Pride is a heavy shield to carry when you're bleeding out, he said softly. He took another slow, deliberate step. Let me help. I mean you no harm. Something in his voice, a genuine lack of malice that she, a veteran of countless battles and betrayals, could not detect, made her hesitate. He was right. Her options were grim. She could try to make it back to the surface, a journey that would take hours, bleeding and with a potential infection setting in. Or she could trust this stranger who had just saved her life with an impossible display of power. Against her better judgment, against every instinct honed in the bloody streets of Orario and the treacherous depths of the dungeon, she gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. He approached slowly, his movements calm and non-threatening. He knelt before her, his eyes focused on her injured arm. May I? He asked, his voice still quiet. She stared at him for a long moment, then reluctantly. She lowered her sword and extended her wounded arm. He gently took her wrist, his touch surprisingly warm. His fingers were calloused, the hands of a man who worked, but his hold was gentle. He examined the wound, his brow furrowed in concentration. The gash was deep, the edges already turning a purplish black. Hold still, he murmured. He placed his free hand over the wound, his palm hovering a few inches above her skin. Ryuu tensed, bracing for, she didn't know what. A painful procedure, a strange spell. What happened next defied all logic. A soft, emerald green light emanated from his palm. It was a gentle, soothing glow, warm and full of life. It felt like standing in a sunbeam after a long winter. The light washed over her wound, and an incredible sensation followed. The cold, spreading numbness was replaced by a comforting warmth. She could feel, actually feel, her flesh knitting back together. Muscle fibers rewove themselves, torn skin sealed over, the dark discoloration of the poison was drawn out and dissipated into nothingness. She stared, utterly speechless, as the gruesome injury vanished before her very eyes, leaving behind only smooth, unblemished skin and the faint, lingering warmth of his energy. The entire process took less than a minute. No potions, no chance, no divine blessings. Just a silent, green light. He pulled his hand back, the light fading. That should do it, he said, as if he had just applied a simple bandage. He looked up, meeting her stunned gaze. The internal poison is neutralized, but you've lost a fair amount of blood. You should rest. Ryuu pulled her arm back, flexing her fingers. There was no pain, no stiffness. It was as if the injury had never happened. She looked from her arm to his face, her mind a whirlwind of questions. What she had just witnessed was not magic as she knew it. It was not an adventurer's skill. It was something else entirely. Something primal and inexplicable. What was that? She finally managed to ask. Her voice barely a whisper. A way of encouraging the body to do what it does naturally, he replied cryptically, standing up. The energy in this place is sick. Tainted. It's clinging to the monsters. Making them stronger, more organized. This isn't random. Something is causing it. He looked around the cavern, his eyes sweeping the shadows as if he could see the very corruption he spoke of. You should leave this floor. It's not safe. He turned to leave, his part in this drama seemingly concluded. He retrieved her fallen sword, wiped the monster drool from it on the tunic of a dead hound. and offered it to her, hilt first. She took it automatically, her fingers wrapping around the familiar leather grip. "Wait," she called out as he began to walk away into the darkness from which he came. "I don't even know your name." He paused at the edge of the cavern's light but didn't turn around. His silhouette was a stark figure against the oppressive gloom of the tunnel beyond. "A name is just a label," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "It's what you do that defines you. Be careful, the balance down here is shifting." He was about to melt back into the shadows when her voice, stronger now, rang out with the formality of her elven heritage and the conviction of a warrior whose life had just been saved. "My name is Ryuu Lion," she declared to his retreating back. "I owe you a debt. Elves do not forget such things." For a moment, he was still. Then, he gave a slight, almost lazy wave over his shoulder, a gesture of dismissal that was somehow not insulting. "Just stay safe, Ryuu Lion." His voice drifted back to her. "The dungeon is angry today." And then he was gone. He didn't just walk into the darkness, he was consumed by it, vanishing from sight and sense so completely it was as if he had never been there at all. Ryuu was left alone in the silent, body-strewn cavern, the only evidence of his existence the impossible health of her arm and the memory of quiet, cerulean eyes that held the wisdom of an age. She stood there for a long time, the silence of the 34th floor no longer feeling like a weight, but like a question. A question that had a name she did not know, and a power she could not comprehend. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Anomaly at the Gate. The journey upwards was a steady unspooling of pressure, a slow ascent from the crushing silent depths into a world of vibrant, chaotic life. Naruto moved with a steady, ground-eating pace, leaving the alien landscapes of the lower floors behind. The phosphorescent fungi gave way to mundane lichen. The air lost its heavy, ozone-rich tang, and the silence was gradually replaced by a distant, ever-present hum. The monsters changed, too. The cunning, psychologically terrifying predators of the deep were replaced by more straightforward beasts of instinct and brute force, war shadows, orcs, and swarms of imps that he bypassed with contemptuous ease, melting into the rock formations like a ghost. He was a creature of the deep ascending into the shallows, and he felt as out of place as a leviathan in a paddling pool. He didn't need to consult a map. His senses, even in their dormant state, felt the pull of the surface, the great concentration of life that was Orario. After his encounter with the elf, Ryuu Lion, he had spent another day in the quiet solitude of the 30th floor. Meditating and centering himself, the memory of her fierce, desperate fight and the profound wrongness of the corrupted monsters lingered in his mind, a discordant note in his usually tranquil existence. It was a problem, he concluded, but not his problem. His goal was singular. Trade his hard-won prize for the resources he needed, and then return to the sanity of the wilds. He emerged from the base of Babel Tower into the full, unrestrained roar of Orario. It was a physical blow. After months in the profound quiet of the dungeon, the sudden explosion of sound was staggering. A cacophony of thousands of voices shouting, laughing, and haggling, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the boisterous music of a dozen different street performers, the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestone, it all merged into a single, overwhelming wave of noise that made his teeth ache. But the sound was nothing compared to the sensory input that flooded his dormant sage perception. Even without actively drawing on nature's energy, a lifetime of sensitivity had left him unable to completely shut it out. The city was a raging, psychic inferno. It was a billion tangled threads of emotion, intent, and life force. He felt the sharp, pointed greed of a merchant closing a deal, the fluttering hope of a young adventurer looking at the tower for the first time, the dull, aching despair of a beggar in an alley, the fiery passion of a couple locked in a secret embrace. It was the entirety of the human, and non-human, condition, compressed into one sprawling metropolis and beamed directly into his skull. The clean, simple energies of rock, water, and wilderness were gone, replaced by this messy, beautiful, terrifying storm of mortal ambition. He reflexively drew his senses inward, pulling his awareness into a tight sphere around himself, a mental shield against the deluge. It was a technique he hadn't needed in years, a relic of his early days learning to control his powers. A faint sheen of sweat broke out on his brow. His calm, ordered world had just been invaded. The city was in the throes of the monster Philia, a festival he had only read about in scavenged books. Banners of very color and familiar crest imaginable were strung between buildings, flapping in the breeze that carried the tantalizing, greasy scent of roasted meats and sweet pastries. The streets were a river of people. Stern-faced adventurers in gleaming armor, chattering merchants, giggling children with painted faces, and demi-humans of every variety. A hulking bowsman laughed heartily beside a live, cat-like Palom. A team of dwarven smiths argued good-naturedly over the quality of a blade. It was a vibrant tapestry of life, but to Naruto, it was claustrophobic. He felt the press of bodies, the constant, unpredictable swirl of movement. The sheer, suffocating proximity to so many other souls. He needed to find the guild. He spotted a city guard, his armor polished to a mirror shine, looking bored and overheated near a fountain. Naruto navigated the throng with an unnatural ease, slipping through gaps that weren't there, his body making minute adjustments to avoid contact, an island of calm in the chaotic stream. "Excuse me," Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear. "Can you direct me to the guild?" The guard, startled out of his reverie, looked him up and down. Naruto's attire, practical, durable gear made of dark, unidentifiable monster hides, free of any familiar crest, marked him as an outsider. Straight down the main thoroughfare, half a league. Can't miss it. Huge building, looks like it's holding up the sky. The guard grunted, then his eyes narrowed slightly. "You an adventurer?" "Something like that," Naruto replied noncommittally, giving a slight nod of thanks before turning and merging back into the crowd. Leaving the guard staring after him. The walk was a trial by immersion. He kept his head down, his focus on the guard's directions, trying to block out the sensory assault. Finally, the building came into view, and the guard hadn't been exaggerating. The guild headquarters was a monolithic structure of white marble and granite, imposing and grand, a temple dedicated to the art of adventure and the bureaucracy that underpinned it. Passing through the massive double doors was like stepping into another world. The chaotic, vibrant energy of the festival was cut off as if by a knife, replaced by a controlled, orderly hum. The air smelled of aged paper, ink, floor polish, and the faint, metallic tang of nervous sweat. Adventurers, supporters, and guild staff moved with purpose, their voices a low murmur compared to the roar outside. It was a different kind of pressure, the pressure of rules, expectations, and judgment. Naruto found the long, serpentine Lin for the monster drop exchange and took his place at the end. He stood in silence, an anomaly among the boisterous adventurers around him. They talked loudly of their delves, boasting of their feats, comparing the sizes of their magic stone caches. And then Gareth just smashed the whole pack of them with one swing. You should have seen the look on their faces. The 18th floor is crawling with minotaurs this season. The payout is great, but my shield is completely busted. Heard the Loki Familia cleared 3 new passages on the 50th. Can you even imagine? It was a dialect of a world he didn't belong to. His own delves were silent, solitary affairs. His victories were quiet, his rewards the simple fact of continued survival. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, like a traveler who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in a foreign land where he did not speak the language. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of standing still, he reached the front of the line. He found himself at a polished mahogany counter, facing a young woman who looked as if she were carved from professionalism itself. She was a half-elf, with the delicate features and slightly pointed ears of her elven heritage. But her brown hair was pulled back into a severe, practical bun. Her eyes, a sharp, intelligent shade of green, scanned him with a swift, practiced assessment. A nameplate on her desk read, "Aina Tool. Adventurer card, please," she said, her voice crisp and polite, not looking up from the paperwork she was finishing. "I don't have one," Naruto replied. Her pen stopped scratching. She looked up, her professional smile unwavering but her eyes holding a flicker of impatience. She took in his strange gear again. "Ah, I see. Are you new to the city? If you wish to register as an adventurer, you'll first need to join a familia. The registration desk is to your left. I'm not here to register. And I'm not with a familia." The smile finally faltered. Aina Tool leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting from polite efficiency to genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, perhaps I misunderstood. This counter is for guild-registered adventurers to exchange monster materials and magic stones for Valis. If you're a non-combatant or a supporter, the adventurer you are affiliated with must be present to authorize the transaction. Naruto understood the impasse. He was an error in her system. A piece that didn't fit. Explanations were useless. Proof was everything. He reached into his vest and carefully placed the small, velvet-lined box on the counter, sliding it forward. Then, he placed a large, tightly bound scroll beside it. I am neither an adventurer nor a supporter, he said calmly. I gathered these myself. Aina eyed the box with suspicion, then the scroll. Sir, I can't accept materials from an unaffiliated individual. It's strictly against guild regulations. It's a measure to prevent theft and illegal poaching in the upper floors. This wasn't from the upper floors, Naruto said. He placed a hand on the scroll and channeled a small amount of chakra into the seal. With a soft poof and a cloud of white smoke that smelled faintly of ozone, the scroll's contents were released. The dead body of the grave lurker materialized on the floor beside the counter. The effect was instantaneous. A collective gasp went through the section of the guild hall. The low hum of business died, replaced by a stunned silence. The creature, even in death, was terrifying. Its formless, shadow-absorbing hide seemed to drink the light from the hall's mage lights. Its size alone was imposing. But to the trained eyes of the adventurers present, it was the unmistakable silhouette of a deep-floor monstrosity, a creature of nightmare. Aina Tool's face had gone pale. Her professional composure, a shield honed by years of dealing with arrogant adventurers and horrific reports, shattered into a million pieces. She stared at the corpse, then at the calm, blonde-haired man standing before her. Her mind refusing to connect the two. That's, she stammered. A grave lurker, Naruto finished for her, his voice still maddeningly serene. From the 34th floor. I believe the guild pays for the corpse, as well as specialized components. He gently tapped the box on the counter. Its sarcophagus is in here. The word, sarcophagus, sent a fresh wave of shock through the onlookers. Two heavily armored guild staff, their hands on the pommels of their swords, rushed over. What's going on here? One demanded, his eyes wide as he took in the monster. Assess it, Aina commanded, her voice regaining a sliver of its authority. Now, one of the staff, a grizzled dwarf with a scar over one eye, was clearly a monster expert. He approached the lurker cautiously, prodding it with a metal tool, examining its featureless head and chitinous plates. His face grew paler with every passing second. He looked up, his expression one of sheer disbelief. It's real, the dwarf breathed, his voice filled with awe and terror. By my ancestors' beards, it's a genuine grave lurker. And it's fresh, killed within the last 2 days. He then noticed the clean, precise wound in its chest. The killing blow, it's surgical. Not a burn, not a slash, I've never seen anything like it. All eyes turned back to Naruto. He stood there patiently, his hands tucked into his pockets, looking like he was waiting for a bus. The dissonance was jarring. He didn't look like a hero who had slain a beast of legend. He looked like a traveler who had brought in an unusual piece of luggage. Aina took a deep, steadying breath, her mind rebooting. The situation had escalated far beyond procedural norms. Sir, she said, her voice now dangerously formal. You will come with me. Now, she gestured for the guards. Secure the materials and bring them. We're going to the director's office. Naruto found himself escorted through a series of corridors, away from the public eye. Into the administrative heart of the guild. The director's office was less opulent than he'd expected, a large, circular room lined with bookshelves and maps, dominated by a massive oak desk. A stern-looking man with gray hair and the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much sat behind it. Aina quickly and efficiently explained the situation, her voice trembling only slightly. The director, Royman Mardial, stared at Naruto. He looked at the sarcophagus, now sitting on his desk, its internal light pulsing gently. He looked at the report from the assessor. He looked back at Naruto. No familia, Royman stated, his voice a low rumble. No, sir, Aina confirmed. No adventurer registration. None, sir. And you claim you killed this, alone? Royman asked, his gaze pinning Naruto to the spot. I was the only one there. Naruto replied, choosing his words carefully. With what weapon? What magic? A level 5 party would hesitate to engage a lurker. The reports say they hunt with shadow and fear. To slay one alone, it is unheard of. It is impossible. Naruto simply shrugged. Impossible is just a word for something you haven't seen yet. I have my own methods. The frustration in the room was palpable. Naruto wasn't being difficult, but his refusal to provide a neat, understandable answer was breaking their entire worldview, a worldview built on the bedrock of Falna, levels, and the divine system of the gods. He was a walking, breathing paradox. The guild's charter is clear, Royman said, rubbing his temples. Payment for monster materials is rendered to the adventurer or familia who procured them. You or neither. Technically, we owe you nothing. Legally, these materials are ownerless. Naruto's calm finally cracked, just a little. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. I killed it. I carried it 34 floors. I think that establishes ownership. Proof of feat is required. Royman countered, his voice rising. A status sheet. A witness from your familia. Something. Anything. The dead monster on your floor is my proof, Naruto said, his voice dropping, taking on a hard edge that made Aina flinch. My witness is the fact that I'm standing here and it isn't. Pay me what it's worth, or I will take my property and sell it to the highest bidder on the black market. I assure you, the Daedalus street merchants won't be as concerned with my paperwork. The threat hung in the air, potent and real. The guild losing such a rare and valuable component to the black market would be a major embarrassment. Royman and Aina exchanged a look. They were cornered. This is unprecedented. Royman finally conceded, slumping back in his chair. He looked at Aina. Draw up a provisional contract. List him as an independent contractor. Take his testimony, get a description, a name. And for the gods, sake. Pay him. I don't want the Freya or Loki Familia hearing about a free agent of this caliber before we know what he is. Aina nodded, a look of grim determination on her face. She spent the next hour with Naruto, filling out a mountain of paperwork. She asked for his name. Naruto, he supplied, leaving off the surname. Age, he guessed, around 19. Place of origin, the wilds. Every answer was a new dead end, a fresh source of frustration for her orderly mind. Finally, it was done. A guild cashier, under heavy guard, brought in a large, heavy sack that clinked with the sound of a fortune. The sarcophagus and the lurker's materials had been valued at an astronomical sum. The guild will require a follow-up interview in 3 days' time, Aina said, handing him a temporary identification paper. Do not leave Orario. It was an order disguised as a statement. Naruto took the bag of Valis and the paper. The sheer amount of bureaucracy was more exhausting than the hunt itself. He felt suffocated. I need some air, he said, turning and leaving the office before she could say another word. He stepped back out into the festival. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the street. The chaos hadn't abated. He took a deep breath of the thick, food-scented air and felt a crushing sense of loneliness. He had the money, but the cost had been a piece of his anonymity. It was then that the screams started. Further down the street, a large merchant's cart, clearly overloaded, had hit a deep rut in the cobblestones. With a loud crack of splintering wood, the primary cage on its flatbed broke apart. A dozen or so creatures, low-level goblins and dog-faced kobolds, likely destined for some minor arena or training ground, spilled out into the panicked crowd. Chaos erupted. People screamed and scrambled to get away, tripping over each other in their haste. The disoriented monsters, fueled by fear and aggression, began to lash out. A goblin leapt onto a food stall, scattering hot coals. A kobold snapped at the heels of a fleeing child. The city guards, caught on the other side of the festival's thickest crowd, were struggling to push through. Naruto sighed, a deep, weary sound. It wasn't his city. It wasn't his problem. But the sight of the terrified child, frozen in fear as the kobold lunged, struck a chord deep within him. He dropped the bag of Valis. It was heavy enough to stay put, and moved. He didn't use a Rasengan. He didn't summon a clone. He didn't need to. He flowed through the panicked mob, a whisper of motion. He reached the child just as the kobold's jaws were about to snap shut. His hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a precise, two-fingered jab to the creature's neck. The kobold stiffened and dropped, unconscious before it hit the ground. He didn't pause. He scooped up a handful of loose stones from the street. With a series of quick flicks of his wrist, the pebbles became lethal projectiles. One struck a goblin in the knee, shattering its patella. Another hit a second goblin square between the eyes, knocking it out cold. A third ricocheted off a wall to disable a kobold sneaking up on a fallen woman. It was a masterpiece of efficiency, a non-lethal display of pinpoint accuracy. Within moments, 5 of the 12 monsters were down, twitching or unconscious. From across the square, 2 figures had been watching. Drawn by the commotion, Hyryuu, the elder Amazon sister, had a look of mild annoyance. Her sister, Tiona, however, was mesmerized. Her eyes, wide with excitement, were locked on the blonde stranger. "Whoa, Tiona, look at that guy," Tiona chirped, pointing. "He's not even using a weapon. How's he doing that?" Tiona loved heroes. She loved epic tales. And the man for her was moving like a character from one of her favorite stories. He wasn't using the powerful, sweeping blows of an Amazon, or the elegant swordplay of an elf. His style was completely alien, a series of sharp, sudden movements. Economical and brutally effective, he ducked under a wild swing from a goblin, his hand snaking out to grab its arm, twisting it in a way that made the creature shriek and drop its club. He then dispatched it with a sharp kick to the side of the head. By the time the sweating, out-of-breath city guards finally pushed through the crowd, all 12 monsters were lying in a neat, unconscious pile. Naruto, seeing the authorities had arrived, dusted off his hands and turned to retrieve his money, eager to disappear before anyone could ask him any questions. He was too slow. A blur of green and brown shot through the crowd, and Hyryuu skidded to a halt in front of him, a massive grin on her face. Her long, dark hair was tied back, and her Amazonian gear did little to hide her powerful, athletic build. "Hey, you," she exclaimed, her voice booming with unrestrained enthusiasm. She pointed a thumb back at the pile of monsters. "That was amazing. Totally incredible. I've never seen anyone fight like that. What was that move with the rocks? And the finger poke thing? Are you a new hero? You have to tell me your story. Is it a tragic one? I love those." Naruto stared at her, utterly bewildered. This girl was a human hurricane of energy and noise, the polar opposite of his entire existence. He had just faced down the guild's directorate, but this bubbly, overexcited Amazon was somehow more intimidating. He just shook his head, grabbed his bag of Valis, and tried to step around her. "I have to go." "No way," she said, easily stepping to block his path. "A guy with moves like that can't just have to go." "I'm Tiona. Who are you?" Before Naruto could formulate a response that might get her to leave him alone, another voice cut in, sharp and professional. "There you are." He turned to see Aina Tool marching towards them, a fresh stack of papers in her hand and a look of supreme exasperation on her face. "You were instructed not to cause any public disturbances," she said, her eyes flicking from him to the guards cleaning up the mess, then to the star-struck Amazon. "Oh, it's the guild lady," Tiona chirped. "Did you see him? He was like whoosh and bam and thwack." Aina ignored her, her focus entirely on Naruto. "We need to add a witness report of this incident to your provisional file." Naruto felt a headache beginning to form behind his eyes. He was now standing in the middle of a crowded street in a city he didn't understand, holding a fortune he didn't know how to spend, caught between a bureaucratic half-elf who saw him as a threat to all established order and a hyperactive Amazon who saw him as the hero of a new epic. He looked from Aina's stern, analytical gaze to Tiona's wide, adoring one. The quiet, predictable rhythm of his life, hunt, survive, improve, was gone, shattered on the cobblestones of Orario. The silence of the deep dungeon had never felt so far away. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Gaze from the Heavens. The news of a ghost did not gallop through Orario's cobbled streets, it seeped. It spread not through official channels, which were frantically trying to contain it, but through the city's true arculatory system. The whispers of off-duty guild staff, the boasts of adventurers who had been in the hall that day, and the avaricious gossip of information brokers. The tale grew with each telling. A lone man, some said. A boy, said others. No familia, no Falna, no past. He had walked out of the dungeon with the corpse of a grave lurker and a king's ransom in his pocket, leaving behind a trail baffled bureaucrats in a chasm of unanswered questions. This whisper, this rumor of an impossibility, eventually flowed upwards, past the mundane world of mortals, and came to rest in the divine halls of the gods themselves. In the pragmatic, smoke-filled strategy room of the Loki Familia headquarters, Twilight Manor, the whisper had become a formal report, laid bare on the heavy oak table. The room was one of comfort built for function, not for show. Maps of the dungeon, marked with annotations in a dozen different hands, covered one wall. Shelves overflowed with historical texts and bestiaries. The air was thick with the scent of Loki's favorite pipe tobacco and the low crackle of a fire in the hearth. Loki herself was sprawled across a worn leather sofa, one leg hooked over the armrest, looking for all the world like a lazy, freckle-faced farmhand. But her sharp, crimson eyes, fixed on the report, held a dangerous, calculating glint. Across from her sat the heart of her familia's command, Fin Dieumni. The Palom captain, his thumb resting thoughtfully on his chin. Rivrielio's Alf, the elven archmage, her expression serene but her eyes troubled, and Gareth Landrock, the dwarven vanguard. His arms crossed over his barrel chest, his beard braided with steel rings. Leaning against the mantelpiece, pointedly aloof, was the werewolf Bet Loga, polishing a gauntlet and radiating an aura of supreme arrogance. So, Loki began, breaking the silence as she puffed a smoke ring towards the ceiling. The guild's in a right tizzy. A fella waltzes in, no status, no god, and dro. P.S. a deep floor nightmare on their counter like he's delivering the morning milk. Kills it alone, he says. With his own methods. She gave a dry chuckle. Gotta admire the stones on him. Finn tapped a finger on the table. The tactical implications are staggering. A single combatant, operating with the effectiveness of a high-level party, completely independent of the Familia system. He is a strategic blind spot. We don't know his motivations, his allegiances, or the limits of his abilities. He's a queen that just appeared on the board from nowhere. It's the nature of his abilities that concerns me more, Riveria added. Her voice a low, melodic hum. The report from the assessor is vague at best. The lurker was killed by a precise, piercing blow. No traces of sword work, magic, or even a high-impact explosive. Aina Tool's addendum mentioned he dealt with a monster outbreak using thrown pebbles and some form of unarmed combat that induced paralysis. It sounds like something from a forgotten age, a form of power that doesn't align with the arcanium we know. Gareth grunted, the sound like grinding stones. Power is power. Kid's strong, no doubt about that. Takes more than just fancy tricks to bring down a lurker. Takes guts, takes strength. I'll give him that. Bet snorted, a derisive, wolfish sound. Or it takes a gimmick. Some rare magic item, a one-off trick. You're a LL talking like he's the second coming of the hero. He's a no-name chump who got lucky. He sneered, his golden eyes flashing with contempt. No Falna, no level. That's the law of the world. He's nothing. I could break him in half before he even blinked. And what if you couldn't, puppy? Loki shot back, her lazy demeanor sharpening. What if he's exactly what the report says he is? A mortal who's found a different path to power. A path that doesn't involve us. She sat up, her expression turning serious. That's not just a blind spot, Finn. That's a threat, a challenge to the very system we oversee. It's a wild card that could burn the whole house of cards down. She paused, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. And gods, do I love a wild card. She looked at her captain. Finn, I want eyes on him. Not Tiona and Tione, they're too loud. Use the shadow squad. I want to know where he eats, where he sleeps, who he talks to. I want to know the brand of soap he uses. Don't engage. Just watch. Learn. I want to understand the rules of the game this, Naruto, is playing. Finn nodded, his face a mask of calm strategy. Consider it done. Loki leaned back, her grin widening as she stared into the dancing flames of the fire. The game in Orario, a game of power and influence she had mastered, had just been injected with a new, utterly unpredictable variable. For a goddess bored by centuries of relative stability, it was the most exciting thing to happen in a very long time. Far across the city, where the alabaster spire of Folkvanger pierced the darkening sky, a different kind of observation was taking place. Here, there were no maps, no scent of tobacco. The air on Freya's personal balcony was a perfumed caress, carrying the scent of night-blooming moon petals and the cool, clean air of the upper atmosphere. The entire sprawling city of Orario was laid out below her, a breathtaking carpet of glittering lights under a sea of stars. Freya, the goddess of beauty, reclined on a divan of plush, silver silk. Her silver hair cascaded around her, and her amethyst eyes, which could see more than mere light and shadow, were fixed on the city below. Behind her, a silent, unmoving mountain of muscle and loyalty, stood her captain, Ottar. To any other being, Orario at night was a beautiful sight. To Freya, it was a tapestry of souls. Her divine sight didn't just perceive people. It perceived the quality of their spirit, their hue. Most citizens were tiny, flickering embers of pale white or gray. The adventurers were brighter, their souls burning with colors diktat, ed by their strength and nature, a fierce crimson for a berserker, a steady blue for a mage, a hardy brown for a dwarf. The executives of the various familias were brilliant torches against the gloom. She could pick out the Loki Familia's elite with ease. Finn's soul was a sharp, focused beam of silver light, a strategist's soul. Ice Wallenstein's was a dazzling, windswept vortex of pure, untamed gold. They were all beautiful. They were all part of her collection, whether they knew it or not. She had catalogued every bright soul in the city, savored their unique colors, understood their radiance. Until today, her gaze swept over the city, past the familiar flames, searching. The report from her own spies had been far more detailed than the guild's. They had described the boy, Naruto, his strange calm, his impossible power. And when her gaze finally found him, she drew in a sharp, stunned breath. He was leaving the guild district, a boisterous Amazonian girl, Tiona Hiryut, a bright orang. Flame of simple joy, buzzing around him like a moth. But it was his soul, his hue, that made Freya's immortal heart skip a beat. It was not a lamp, lit by the grace of a god. The souls of every adventurer with a Falna, no matter how bright, had a faint, ethereal tether connecting them to their deity, a wick drawing divine power. His had none. His soul was a star. It was a self-sustaining, thermonuclear furnace of brilliant, sun-warmed gold, so pure and bright it made the souls of even the highest-level adventurers look like cheap candles in comparison. It was swirled with deep, primal ribbons of sunset orange, a color of immense vitality and untamed natural energy. It was a soul that had achieved its incandescent brilliance on its own terms, a fixed point of light in a universe of reflections. It did not borrow its light. It was the light. Freya sat bolt upright, her poise forgotten. A tremor of pure, unadulterated desire, an emotion she had not felt with such intensity in centuries, washed through her. She was the ultimate collector, a connoisseur of spiritual beauty. She had seen everything, catalogued everything, possessed everything she had ever wanted. And in an instant, her entire collection, her centuries of acquisitions, had been rendered utterly meaningless. They were trinkets. He was the crown jewel. Ottar, she breathed, her voice trembling with a raw, new hunger. Look, down there, by the western gate. Quote, her captain's gaze followed hers. Even without her soul sight, he could pick out the blonde-haired young man by the sheer force of the goddess's attention. The anomaly, my goddess. He is no anomaly, Freya whispered, her amethyst eyes wide, drinking in the sight of that radiant soul. He is a miracle, a paradox, a mortal who has polished his spirit to the brilliance of a god. Without any of our help. Her voice dropped, becoming thick with possessive adoration. His soul, it sings a song I have never heard before. A melody of its own creation. She rose from the divan, walking to the edge of the balcony, her silver gown trailing behind her like moonlight. She reached out a hand as if she could pluck him from the street below. I must have him, Ottar, she declared. Her voice no longer a whisper but a statement of absolute intent. I must have him, not charmed, not broken, not as a thrall kneeling at my feet. I must have him choose me. I want that glorious, defiant, self-made light to turn its warmth upon me and me alone. Her eyes gleamed with a terrifying light of their own. He is not a new piece for the collection. He is the collection. The rest were merely practice. Ottar remained silent, his loyalty absolute. He knew that look in his goddess's eyes. The world of this strange boy, Naruto, was about to be turned upside down. The Saint powerful and obsessive goddess in Orario had just found her life's new, singular purpose. The clang of steel on steel was the only language Ice Wallenstein truly trusted. It was a language of force and response, of weakness and strength, a pure meritocracy where only results mattered. In the center of the Loki Familia's main training yard, a wide, dust-swept expanse of packed earth, she was a whirlwind of motion. Her sword, desperate, was a silver blur, its edge whistling through the air. She fought not one opponent, but 3 of her Familia's high-level members. She weaved between them, her footwork a blur, her golden hair flying behind her like a comet's tail. Her fighting style was like the wind that was her epithet, aerial, fluid, relentless, and devastatingly powerful. A parry, a riposte, a disarming strike that sent a sword spinning from a man's hand. She was magnificent, a living weapon honed to perfection. And when the spar was over, her 3 opponents panting and disarmed, she stood alone in the center of the yard, her chest rising and falling rhythmically, not a single hair out of place. But as the adrenaline faded, the familiar emptiness returned. She felt no joy in her victory, no pride. There was only the cold, hard calculus of her quest. It's not enough. I'm still not strong enough. The image of the one-eyed black dragon, the beast that had taken her parents, was forever burned behind her eyes. Every victory was just one more insufficient step on an impossibly long road. She walked to the side of the yard, sinking to her knees to meticulously clean, desperate, her movements automatic. The world around her faded into a dull hum. It was in this state of quiet isolation that Ryuu found her. The archmage approached silently, her green robes making no sound, and sat beside the young swordswoman. Your form was perfect, Ice, Ryuu said, her voice gentle. Your speed has increased since your last level up. Ice didn't look up from her blade. It's not enough, she replied, her own voice soft and breathy, almost devoid of emotion. Ryuu sighed. It was always the same conversation. Strength is not merely about the speed of your blade, child. It is about the spirit that guides it. She hesitated, then decided to plant the seed. The reports about the new arrival, the one they call Naruto. They are quite extraordinary. Ice's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. She had heard the whispers, the talk of the grave lurker. She had dismissed it as an exaggeration. Gareth and Finn believe he is a level 5, perhaps even a 6, in terms of raw combat ability, Ryuu continued, watching Ice carefully. And yet, the guild has confirmed it 3 times. He has no Falna. His body has never received a god's blessing. Ice finally looked up, her golden eyes, usually so distant, now holding a flicker of confusion. That's impossible. Excelia is the source of strength. Without it, a person is just a person. Precisely, Ryuu agreed. It defies every law we hold as true. To generate the kind of force needed to slay a lurker, to move with the speed he was described as having, it would require a source of power we do not comprehend. A power born not from a god's grace, but from the self. The words struck Ice with the force of a physical blow. Her entire existence, her entire identity, was predicated on the Falna system. Level up, gain Excelia, grow stronger. It was a linear, understandable path. It was the only path she knew. This stranger, this Naruto, his very existence suggested that her path was not the only one. It suggested that there was a form of strength completely alien to her, a power that could be cultivated outside the divine framework that governed her world. If he could become that strong without a Falna, what did that mean for her quest? Was she on the right path? The fastest path, the only path? For the first time since she had picked up a sword, a genuine, piercing question cut through the fog of her single-minded obsession. It wasn't a desire to fight him or to prove she was stronger. It was a deep, burning need to understand. How was it possible? Ice looked down at her right hand, the hand that held her sword. The hand that bore the invisible mark of her goddess's blessing. For the very first time in her life, she felt a flicker of doubt. The hostess of fertility was an anchor in the chaotic sea of Orario. Within its warm, wood-paneled walls, the noise of the city was muted, replaced by the friendly chatter of patrons, the clinking of tankards, and the rich, comforting smell of Mamma Mia's famous beef stew. It was a place of community, a rare sanctuary of genuine warmth. Ryuu Lion moved through the tables with a quiet, practiced efficiency. Dressed in the simple green and white uniform of a waitress, she was a world away from the grim, blood-soaked warrior of the deep dungeon. She refilled drinks, cleared plates, and responded to the rowdy adventurers with a polite, distant calm. She was trying to immerse herself in the routine, to let the mundane rhythm of the work wash away the memories that haunted her waking thoughts. But it was no use. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it. The calm, cerulean gaze of the man named Naruto. The impossible, gentle green light that had emanated from his hand. The feeling of her flesh knitting itself back together, a miracle performed as casually as tying a shoelace. He had shattered her understanding of the world, and the pieces were still refusing to fit back together. Who was he? What was that power? He was an enigma, a GHO saint who had saved her life and then vanished back into the shadows. Her elven hearing, a trait she usually tried to suppress in the noisy tavern, was what caught it. She was clearing a table near a darkened corner booth, where 3 rough-looking adventurers were hunched over their ale, their voices low and conspiratorial. "Swear it's true," one of them rasped, a man with a nasty scar across his nose. "My cousin's a guard for a merchant who deals with the Ishtar Familia. Says they've got a new toy." "Heard about that," a second man, bulkier and with a shaved head, muttered into his tankard. "Some Renard girl, ain't she? A fox person, real rare. Heard her magic's something special. A level booster, or so the rumor goes." Ryuu froze, her back to them, her hand tightening around a dirty plate. The first man leaned in closer. "They call her the Nightingale. Keep her locked up tight in the main palace, deep in their territory. Charge a king's ransom for a private audience. Not for that, not usually. Just to have her use that magic during a party's status update. Instant power boost. Can you imagine what a familia would pay for that? Heard Frey's been training her personally." The third man added with a cruel chuckle. "That giant toad woman. Bet the poor little fox wishes she were dead." The casual cruelty of the words sent a shard of ice through Ryu's heart. Ishtar Familia. Frey, a captive Renard girl, a nightingale, valued only for her rare magic, being trained by one of the most sadistic brutes in Orario. It was a story she knew all too well, the strong preying on the weak. Beauty and rarity twisted into a curse, a life of exploitation and misery. The dormant spirit of the Gale, the vigilante who had once hunted down the wicked in the name of justice, stirred within her. A cold, righteous fury began to burn away the careful neutrality she had cultivated as a waitress. She had to do something. But what? She was Ryuu Lion, the disgraced survivor of the Astria Familia. She had no allies, no resources, no power to challenge a major familia on their home turf. Storming the Ishtar Palace alone was suicide. Her mind raced, desperately searching for a solution, for any option at all. And then, the memory returned, not as a haunting enigma, but as a spark of impossible hope. A man who moved like a ghost and fought with the force of a storm. A man who healed impossible wounds with a touch. A man whose calm eyes held no fear of the dungeon's horrors. A man who answered to no god and no familia, who operated by his own rules. A man named Naruto. He was an anomaly, a wild card, a power that existed outside the system. And he was the only person she had ever met who might be strong enough, and just righteous enough, to care. Ryuu finished clearing the table, her movements now filled with a new, sharp purpose. She looked out the tavern's front window, past the cheerful, lamplit street, towards the distant, glittering spire of Babel, the heart of the city. He had come from the dungeon. He had to still be somewhere in this sprawling, chaotic city. Her decision was made. Her quest for justice wasn't over. It had just found a new, desperate focus. She had to find him. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A fox's shadow in the red light. The following morning dawned gray and overcast, the sky a muted blanket of pewter that seemed to leach the color from Orario. For Ryuu Lion, the weather was a perfect mirror of her mood, grim, determined, and charged with an unspoken purpose. The casual, cruel conversation she had overheard had relit a fire within her. The embers of the righteous fury she had tried so hard to bury beneath the waitress's apron. She could not, would not, abide the suffering of a captive soul. But righteousness without power was merely a prelude to martyrdom. And Ryuu was a pragmatist above all else. She needed the anomaly, She needed Naruto. Finding him in a city of nearly 1,000,000 souls was a daunting task, but not an impossible one. He was a ghost, but he had left footprints, and the largest one was pressed firmly into the floor of the guild headquarters. It was the only logical place to begin. She arrived shortly after the morning rush. Her simple work clothes a stark contrast to the gleaming armor and colorful robes of the adventurers milling about. She bypassed the exchange counters, her destination the main information desk. A place she hadn't visited in years. The clerk, a young, eager human boy, looked up with a practiced smile. "How may the guild assist you?" "I need information," Ryuu said, her voice low and direct. "Regarding an individual who registered yesterday. His name is Naruto." The clerk's smile faltered. The name was clearly flagged. His eyes darted nervously from side to side before he leaned forward. "I'm sorry, miss, but information regarding registered personnel is confidential." "He isn't registered personnel," Ryuu countered coolly. "He has no familia and no official registration. He's operating under a provisional contract. That makes him a public concern, not a private asset. I have urgent business with him that pertains to the safety of the city." It was a masterful bluff, weaving truth with supposition. Spoken with an authority that made the young clerk stammer. He was about to consult his manual when a sharp, familiar voice cut through the air. "Her business is with me." Ryuu turned. Aina Tool stood there, a formidable file clutched in her hands. The file was already thick, and on its tab, Ryuu could just make out the neatly printed name, Naruto. Aina's expression was a mask of professional granite, but her green eyes were sharp with suspicion. She gestured with her head towards a quieter alcove, away from prying ears. Ryuu followed. "Miss Lion," Aina began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "It is highly irregular for a former adventurer, one with a complicated history with the guild, to suddenly take an interest in our most pressing new anomaly." "My history is my own," Ryuu replied, her voice level, "and my interest in him is a personal matter." "I find that hard to believe," Aina shot back, her gaze unwavering. "A man capable of felling a grave lurker single-handedly appears in Orario. And within 48 hours, the Gale comes looking for him. That is not a coincidence, it is a prelude to an event. The guild cannot allow an unknown entity his power to be pointed like a weapon by a known vigilante." The words stung, but Ryu's composure did not crack. Aina saw her as a loose cannon, a ghost from the guild's bloody past. And in a way, she wasn't wrong. "You see a weapon," Ryu said softly. "I see a solution. There is a difference. A solution to what? More unsanctioned justice. More back-alley battles that destabilize the balance of power." Aina's voice was laced with the frustration of someone who believed devoutly in rules and order. "I cannot and will not give you his location. For his safety, and for the city's." The conversation was over. Ryu had hit a wall of intractable bureaucracy. She gave Aina a stiff nod and turned to leave, her mind already racing, calculating her next move. She would have to canvass the inns, bribe information brokers, spend days or even weeks searching. And then she saw him. Standing near the guild's main entrance, staring at a large, posted map of the city with an expression of profound confusion, was Naruto. He wore simple, dark trousers and a gray tunic, the strange, custom-made gear from the dungeon replaced with unremarkable civilian clothes. He had a heavy sack of valise slung over one shoulder and looked so utterly completely out of place that it was almost comical. He was an apex predator from the deep wilderness, baffled by the simple concept of street names. Relief and purpose flooded through Ryu. She strode towards him, ignoring the warning glare from Aina, who had also spotted him from the alcove. "Naruto," she said. He turned, his blue eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Ryu Lion, you're looking better than when I last saw you." "Thanks to you," she acknowledged, then wasted no more time on pleasantries. Her voice dropped. "I need your help. It's not a request for a debt to be repaid. I intend to hire you. I can't match what the guild paid you for the lurker, but I can offer a portion of it." Naruto's brow furrowed. "Help with what? I'm not an adventurer for hire." "No," she agreed. "You're something else, and that's why you're the only one who can do this." She led him away from the guild's entrance, finding a quiet spot in the shadow of a towering griffin statue. There, she laid out the facts, her voice a low, urgent murmur. She spoke of the Ishtar Familia, their cruelty, their untouchable status in the decadent entertainment district. She spoke of the captive Renard girl, the Nightingale, her rare magic being exploited, her life a living hell. She spoke with the cold, dispassionate precision of a commander briefing a soldier, detailing the political impossibilities. The military strength of the Familia, and the certainty that no one, not the guild, not any other Familia, would intervene. I have the intelligence, she concluded, her aquamarine eyes locked on his. I know their territory, their patrols, their weaknesses. But I lack the power to breach their fortress and extract the target. You have that power. You move in ways they won't anticipate. You use skills they have no defense against. Together, we can do this. We can get her out. Naruto listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. His gaze distant. This was it. This was the entanglement he had been so desperate to avoid. A war with a major familia was the deepest, most complex trouble one could find in Orario. His instincts, honed by a lifetime of survival, screamed at him to refuse, to take his money and disappear back into the dungeon where the dangers were at least predictable. But as he looked at Ryuu, he could feel the unwavering truth of her conviction. His sage senses, even while dormant, picked up the powerful, righteous anger burning beneath her calm exterior. And the image she painted, it struck a chord that vibrated with the oldest and most painful memories of his soul. A child, held captive, valued only for a great power sealed within them. A nightingale, in a cage. A Jinchuriki in a village. The parallel was so sharp, so painful, it took his breath away. He remembered the loneliness, the fear, the feeling of being seen not as a person, but as a weapon, a tool, a monster. 2. Allow another to suffer that same fate when he had the power to stop it, it was a betrayal of everything he had become. He let out a long, slow breath, the air fogging slightly in the cool morning. His decision solidified, the cold logic of survival overruled by the unshakable empathy of his past. He met Ryu's expectant gaze. You don't need to hire me, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Some things you do because they need to be done. His blue eyes, which had seemed so calm and distant, now held a glint of hard, focused resolve. When do we start the reconnaissance? Ryu's own careful, controlled expression softened with a flicker of relief so profound it was almost painful. The alliance was forged, not on valis or debts, but on a shared, unspoken understanding of justice. Tonight, she said, when the shadows are deepest, night fell upon the entertainment district not as a gentle blanket, but as a gaudy, sequined veil. It was a place that only truly came alive in the dark, a cancerous jewel box of red, purple, and gold mage lights that painted the foggy air with lurid colors. The sound was a constant, dissonant thrum, the forced laughter from tavern doorways, the seductive melodies from stringed instruments, the drunken shouts of patrons, and the underlying, bass note pulse of 1,000 broken dreams. From a rain-slicked rooftop overlooking the district's main thoroughfare, Naruto and Ryuu observed the scene. Ryuu, clad in her familiar dark green adventuring gear, was a grim shadow. Naruto stood beside her, his simple gray tunic replaced by a dark, form-fitting suit of black cloth that hugged his frame, designed for stealth and silence. This is their domain, Ryuu murmured, her breath a ghost in the chill air. The streets are crawling with Ishtar Familia members and the gangs loyal to them. We go over the roofs. The architecture is old, convoluted. Plenty of cover. Naruto nodded, then closed his eyes. He drew in a slow breath, and the world shifted. He opened his senses, allowing the raw, untamed energy of nature to flood his system. The orange pigmentation blossomed around his eyes, his pupils sharpening into horizontal slits. The world of sight and sound was superseded by the world of life, energy, and emotion. And it was a sensory hell. If the rest of Orario was a chaotic storm, the entertainment district was a psychic cesspool. The air was thick and foul, not just with perfume and spilled liquor, but with the cloying emotional sludge of the place. He felt the raw, desperate lust from the patrons, a hungry, grasping energy that felt like hooks scraping his soul. He felt the brittle, paper-thin facade of joy from the workers, stretched taut over a vast, dark ocean of despair, exhaustion, and crushing debt. He felt the predatory, Riotary arrogance of the Ishtar Familia members, a sickening, oily slick of power that coated everything. The sheer volume of raw, negative emotion was a physical force, a wave of nausea that he had to actively fight down. This place was a wound on the city, festering and deep. "Are you all right?" Ryuu asked, noticing the faint tremor in his hands. "I'm fine," he said, his voice tight. He focused, building mental filters, damming the flood of raw sensation until it was a manageable, albeit disgusting, trickle. "It's just louder than I expected." Ryuu gave him a searching look but didn't press. "Follow me. Stay in my shadow. Don't make a sound." She moved, a green-clad wraith flowing across the rooftops. Her movements were swift, economical, and almost silent, the product of years of experience as a vigilante. She leapt across alleys, her feet landing softly on the opposite ledge, her form immediately melting into the shadows cast by a grotesque gargoyle. Naruto followed, and his silence was absolute. Where Ryuu was nearly soundless, he was a void. He didn't just move quietly, he erased his own presence. He used precise bursts of chakra to adhere to sheer walls for a few seconds, bypassing wide gaps. He ran along the eaves of a building, his balance more perfect than a cat's. When a heavily armed Ishtar patrol passed on the street below them, Ryuu flattened herself behind a chimney, her breathing controlled. Naruto, a few feet away, simply blurred, his form distorting until he seemed to become one with the weathered stone and shadow, a masterful, low-level genjutsu that tricked the eye without alerting the senses. They moved as a synchronized unit, Ryu's practical knowledge of the terrain perfectly complemented by Naruto's supernatural stealth. They navigated the labyrinth of tiled roofs and dark alleys, drawing ever closer to the district's corrupt heart, the Ishtar Familia Palace, a gaudy, multi-spurred fortress of pink marble and gold leaf that was an insult to architecture. It was heavily guarded, with sentries on the walls and patrols circling its base. They found a concealed position on a taller building opposite the palace, hidden behind the ornate facade of what looked like a clock tower. "She would be in the central spire," Ryuu whispered, pointing. "It's where Ishtar herself resides. The most secure location." Naruto nodded, not needing the visual cue. He closed his eyes again, sinking deeper into his sage mode, pushing his senses forward like a delicate probe. He filtered out the gross, overwhelming energies of the guards and patrons, searching for the specific signature he had imagined from Ryu's description. Something small, afraid, but with a great, sleeping power inside it. It took a full minute of intense concentration. Then, he found it. Top floor of the spire. He breathed, his eyes still closed. In a room facing north. His voice grew heavy, laced with a cold anger that made Ryu's skin prickle. "Gods, you were right. Her life force, it's like a candle flame in a hurricane, guttering and faint, almost ready to be extinguished. She's given up. She's resigned to her fate." He paused, his fists clenching at his sides. "But the energy her body holds, it's dormant, but it's immense. A sleeping volcano. They're siphoning it off, like parasites, keeping her just strong enough to produce more." The cold fury in his voice was palpable. This was no longer just a mission to him. It was an extermination of vermin. "I need to confirm it," he said, opening his eyes. "A visual. It's too well guarded," Ryu countered. "We can't get closer without being spotted." "I can," he said simply. He brought his index and middle fingers together in a familiar seal. With a soft, smokeless pop, a perfect duplicate of himself stood beside him. A shadow clone. Ryu's eyes widened, but she had the good sense not to ask questions. "It will go," Naruto said, indicating the clone. "It's weaker than I am, but it has all my skills. It will get a look, and then dispel. The moment it does, I'll know everything it knew." The clone gave a nod and then dropped from the clock tower into the deep shadows below. Ryu watched, mesmerized, as it moved. It didn't just stick to the shadows, it became one. It scaled the sheer marble wall of the Ishtar Palace not like a climber, but like a spider, using chakra to cling to the impossibly smooth surface. It was a terrifying, mesmerizing display of skill. The clone reached the highest floor of the spire, positioning itself just below a large, arched window barred with golden metal. It peered over the sill. The room inside was a gilded cage in the most literal sense. The furniture was opulent, The carpets were plush, but the luxury only served to highlight the misery of its single occupant. Curled on a small, threadbare rug in the center of the room was a young Renard girl. She couldn't have been more than 15. Her fox-like ears, a beautiful shade of sandy gold, were drooped low against her head. A sign of utter despair. Her matching tail was wrapped tightly around her small, frail body. She wore a simple, plain chemise that was little more than rags. She was just broken. A doll whose strings had been cut. This was Haruhime, the nightingale. The clone's heart, a perfect copy of Naruto's, ached at the sight. It was worse than he had imagined. Speaking to her was out of the question. The risk of discovery was too great. But he couldn't just leave her in this state. He had to give her something. A sign, a reason to hold on for just a little longer. Focusing, the CL1 gathered a minuscule amount of Naruto's own chakra, not the potent, world-altering sage energy, but the warm, golden chakra of the man himself. He didn't mold it into a technique. He molded it into a feeling. The feeling of a warm sunbeam on a spring morning. The feeling of safety. The feeling of hope. He pushed this gentle, pure pulse of energy through the window. In the room below, Haruhime flinched. Her head lifted slowly. Her dull, lifeless eyes blinked. She looked around the empty room, a confused frown on her face. What was that? For a fleeting, impossible moment, the crushing weight of her despair had lifted. Replaced by a strange, comforting warmth she hadn't felt in years. A single, crystalline tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but one of profound, inexplicable confusion. A flicker of something long dormant had just been rekindled in the frozen depths of her heart. The clone, its job done, dropped from the ledge and dispelled in the shadows before it hit the ground. Back in the clock tower, the memories and emotions of the clone flooded into Naruto. He saw the gilded cage. He saw the small, broken girl. He felt the echo of her despair and the flicker of her confusion at his touch of hope. He turned to Ryuu, and the calm, collected man she had allied herself with was gone. In his place was a being of cold, terrifying resolve. The ambient light of the city seemed to dim around him, and the air grew heavy, charged with a silent, deadly promise. "You were right," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was more chilling than any shout. "We're getting her out." The mission was no longer about justice. It was personal. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Shattering the gilded cage. The rooftop, which hours before had been their silent perch for observation, was now a makeshift command center. The sliver of a moon cast just enough light to illuminate the crude map Naruto had sketched onto a large, flat piece of slate with a sharp shard of rock. It was a diagram of the entertainment district, annotated with Ryu's corrections and intelligence. The air was cold, sharp with the promise of the coming dawn, and taut with unspoken anticipation. "The plan cannot be a frontal assault," Naruto stated, his voice a low, serious murmur that carried no trace of doubt. He tapped a central point on the map, the Ishtar Familia Palace. Their fortress is designed to repel a direct attack from another familia. "We are only two people. Brute force is suicide. Therefore, we will not use force. We will use chaos." Ryuu leaned over the map, her green-clad form a study in focused intensity. "Chaos is difficult to control. I won't be controlling it," Naruto replied, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips. "I will be conducting it." He looked at her, his cerulean eyes seeming to glow in the gloom. "I need to explain something first. A technique of mine. I can create solid, physical copies of myself. They are not illusions. They can think, fight, and act independently. They are as real as I am, but they are fragile. A single, solid blow will dispel them." Ryu's eyes widened. She had seen him create a single clone during their reconnaissance. But the casual way he spoke of it now implied a scale she could scarcely imagine. Replicating oneself was a power worthy of a god, not a mortal man. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Enough," he said simply. He pointed to the map again. "The plan has 4 phases, designated Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Omega. Phase Alpha is the overture. A large force of my clones will materialize here." He drew a circle around the southern and western edges of the district, far from the palace. "Their objective is maximum disruption. They will start brawls with Ishtar's allied gangs. They will use these. He produced a small, sealed scroll from which he retrieved a paper tag covered in complex ink markings, explosive tags, to create loud, spectacular, but contained detonations. The goal is to create the illusion of a full-scale invasion. It will be chaos, but it will be directed chaos, pulling all of Ishtar's main forces away from the palace to deal with the Phantom Army. He looked to Ryuu for confirmation. She nodded slowly, her mind racing. They'll panic. Their command structure is arrogant and inflexible. They'll empty the palace to crush a perceived external threat, to make an example of them. Quote, exactly, Naruto affirmed, which brings us to phase beta, infiltration. While their eyes are turned outward, we go in. The two of us, the real ones, he dray, WA line from their current position directly to the palace walls. Phase gamma begins once we are inside. I'll create a smaller, secondary team of clones. Their job is internal misdirection. They will, lead the remaining palace guard on wild goose chases, creating conflicting reports and ensuring the path to our target is clear. He paused, his finger coming to rest on the drawing of the central spire. Which leaves phase omega, extraction. We move directly to the spire, secure the Nightingale, and get out. Clean, efficient, and surgical, all under the cover of a three-ring circus. It was audacious. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was a plan that no commander in Orario would ever conceive of because it relied on an ability that shouldn't exist. Ryuu stared at the map, then at Naruto's calm, confident face. For the first time since the fall of her familia, she felt a flicker of the same wild hope she'd felt on the eve of a righteous battle. The Ishtar familia won't know what hit them, she said, a grim smile gracing her own lips. They won't even be sure they were hit at all, Naruto corrected. Let's begin. He moved to a larger, more secluded area of the rooftop, obscured from the street by a high parapet. He brought his hands together in the cross-shaped seal that Ryuu now recognized. He closed his eyes, drawing in a massive breath. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The explosion of chakra was silent but immense. In a rolling wave of dense white smoke, figures erupted into existence. 10, 50, 100, then 200, an entire company of silent, identical soldiers, each one a perfect copy of Naruto. Now stood at attention on the rooftops, their faces set with the same grim purpose as the original. The sheer sight of it was a violation of reality. Ryuu felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't a technique. This was the power of a natural disaster. Naruto, the original, walked among them, giving quiet orders. He divided them into squads, assigning leaders, designating targets. The clones nodded, their movements synchronized and unnervingly precise. He handed out the explosive tags. Then, with a final, sharp nod, he gave the signal. Phase Alpha began. Like a silent, deadly tide, the 200 clones flowed off the rooftops and into the sleeping district below. From the Ishtar Palace's command room, the first report was one of confusion. A brawl had broken out near the southern gate, involving the Minotaur head gang, allies of the Familia. Before the watch commander could dispatch a unit, another report came in. A fire had started in a warehouse on the western fringe. Then, an explosion rocked the entire district, a brilliant flash of orange followed by a deafening boom that rattled the windows of the palace itself. Then all hell broke loose. The communication crystals flared to life with a dozen panicked voices at once. We're under attack. Near the Red Dahlia. There are dozens of them. They move like ghosts. The western wall has been breached. No, wait, they're on the roofs. They're everywhere. It's a monster outbreak. No, it's an army. They all have the same face. Aisha Belka, a high-level Amazonian and one of Ishtar's lieutenants, slammed her fist on the tactical map. Silence, she roared. Get me a clear report. Who are we fighting? We don't know. A terrified guard stammered. They fight like demons, but they disappear in a puff of smoke when you land a solid hit. It's some kind of high-level illusion magic. Another explosion, this one closer, shook the foundations of the palace. The illusion of a full-scale invasion was complete. Ishtar's forces, arrogant and accustomed to being the predators, were thrown into pure, reactive chaos. Aisha, believing their home was being besieged by a rival familia using an unknown magical art. Made the fatal decision Naruto had predicted. All forces deploy. Crush them. I want every last one of these cowards wiped from the face of Orario. Leave only the Praetorian Guard to defend the palace. Go. As the main gates of the fortress flew open and the bulk of the Ishtar Familia's might poured into the streets to fight a phantom army, Naruto and Ryuu began phase beta. They slipped over the high, pink marble walls of the palace courtyard, their feet touching the ground as softly as falling snow. The chaos outside was a symphony of their own making, a perfect cover for their silent infiltration. The beast's attention was diverted. Now, it was time to cut out its heart. The interior of the palace was a testament to vulgar decadence. Gilded statues of Ishtar stood in every alcove. Plush carpets muffled their footsteps, and the air was heavy with cloying incense. It was also in disarray, with the few remaining guards running frantically through the halls. Phase Gamma, Naruto murmured. He created a dozen new clones. They flickered and vanished down corridors, and a fresh wave of chaos began within the walls. A guard would hear a crash in a room, burst in to find it empty. Only for another crash to sound behind him. A patrol would chase a fleeting shadow down a hallway, only to be led into a dead end, finding themselves alone before being knocked unconscious from behind by another clone that had been clinging to the ceiling. Naruto and Ryuu moved through the mayhem, a pocket of deadly calm in the eye of the storm. Ryuu's knowledge was indispensable. The rumors say Ishtar's private chambers connect to the spire through a guarded bridge on the 3rd floor. It should be here. She led him to a set of ornate double doors, guarded by 4 of the elite Praetorians. But before they could even draw their weapons, 2 of Naruto's clones dropped from the ceiling above, landing behind them. The guards were dispatched with swift, silent chops to the back of the neck. They moved on, heading for the spire, the sanctuary of the captive nightingale. They reached the base, a circular chamber at the bottom of a grand, spiraling staircase. Their path was blocked. She was a nightmare of flesh, a mountain of muscle and malice. Phryne Jamil, the toad-like captain of the Ishtar Familia, stood waiting for them, a massive, gnarled club resting on her shoulder. Her wide, amphibian mouth stretched into a grotesque, sadistic grin. Unlike the others, she had not been fooled. Her base animal cunning had told her the chaos outside was too widespread, too perfect. It was a diversion. So, the little rats have come for the songbird, she croaked, her voice a wet, guttural rasp. She licked her lips, her huge, bulbous eyes fixing on Naruto. You must be the one causing all the fuss. You're prettier than the rumors said. Ishtar will enjoy breaking you. Behind her, a dozen of her personal guard, the strongest in the familia, fanned out, their weapons drawn. Ryuu, Naruto said, his voice calm and cold. The guards are yours. The toad is mine. With pleasure, Ryuu breathed, drawing her twin short's words. She shot forward, not at Phryne, but at her guards. Becoming a whirlwind of green and silver. Her blades sang, parrying, thrusting, and slicing, her movements a beautiful, deadly dance as she single-handedly engaged the elite squad. Naruto's attention was solely on Phryne. The toad woman laughed, a horrible, gloating sound, and charged. She was surprisingly fast for her size, her club whistling through the air with enough force to turn a man to paste. She swung it down in a massive overhead arc aimed at crushing Naruto into the marble floor. Naruto didn't move back, he moved in. He flowed under the clumsy but devastating swing, the wind from the club ruffling his hair. As he passed her, his right hand, open-palmed, struck her knee joint with a sharp, precise jab. It wasn't a blow of overwhelming power, but one of perfect, targeted force. Phryne's leg buckled with a wet, popping sound, her charge stumbling. She roared in pain and fury, swinging her club horizontally. Naruto dropped, sliding across the polished floor on his back, the club passing inches over his face. As he slid past her other leg, his left hand shot out, striking her ankle with another precise, nerve-deadening jab. Her other leg went numb. He was not fighting her. He was dissecting her. Phryne was a level 5, a creature of immense physical strength and durability. A direct confrontation would be a messy, destructive brawl. But Naruto wasn't interested in a brawl. He was interested in removal. His style was a thing of chilling efficiency, honed by his past, a blend of his world's most sophisticated arts. He flowed around her like water, his movements too fluid. Too unpredictable for her to track. She was a lumbering behemoth, he was a ghost. Her roars of frustration echoed in the chamber. She swung wildly, smashing pillars, shattering statues, but never touching him. For every one of her attacks, he delivered 2 of his own, not powerful punches, but sharp, debilitating strikes to her pressure points, her joints, her tendons. He was systematically disabling her, taking away her ability to move, to fight, to even stand, all without a single drop of wasted energy. You little insect! She shrieked, finally dropping her club and trying to grab him with her bare hands. Naruto dodged under her grasping hands and delivered a final, 2-fingered strike to a point just below her sternum. Fry's eyes bulged, her entire body seized up, her muscles locked in place. She stood there, a statue of impotent fury, conscious but completely paralyzed. Naruto looked at her with cold, utter disgust. Insects are a vital part of the ecosystem, he said quietly. You're just a parasite. He turned away from her, his attention shifting to Ryuu. She had dispatched half the guards, but the remaining few had her cornered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Naruto blurred, appearing amongst them, a series of swift, precise strikes, and the guards collapsed like puppets with their strings cut. Let's go, he said to Ryuu, who could only stare for a moment at the sheer, terrifying competence he had just displayed. They raced up the spiral staircase, the sounds of battle fading behind them. They reached the top, a single, ornate door. Naruto kicked it open. The room was just as the clone had seen it. A gilded cage, and in the center, Haruhime looked up, her fox ears flattened against her head, her body trembling violently. She scrambled backwards, pressing herself against the far wall, her eyes wide with terror. No more, she whimpered. Naruto's heart ached. He approached slowly, his hands held up. We're not going to hurt you, he said, his voice soft. My name is Naruto. This is Ryuu. We're getting you out of here. Out, she whispered, the word foreign. There is no out. There is now, Naruto said firmly. He reached her side. We have to go, now. Stay with me. I promise, you will be safe. She was too frozen by fear to move. With a sigh, Naruto gently scooped her up into his arms. She was as light as a bundle of twigs. She flinched, but didn't fight, simply burying her face in his shoulder, a small, choked sob escaping her lips. Their escape back through the palace was a blur. The internal chaos was reaching its peak. They bypassed the paralyzed Fry and the unconscious guards, moving swiftly towards the main courtyard, the easiest point of egress over the wall. But as they burst through the main doors into the pre-dawn light, they skidded to a halt. It was too late. The courtyard was filled with a new force. Their armor was practical and professional, their crest the mischievous face of the god Loki. They had established a tight, disciplined perimeter, cutting off all escape. And at their forefront, her silver hair like a banner in the dim light, was Ice Wallenstein. Her sword, desperate, was drawn, its tip pointed directly at them. Beside her stood the formidable Amazon sisters, Tiona and Tiona, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. The Loki Familia had arrived. Ice's golden eyes took in the scene. The notorious vigilante, Ryuu Lion, the enigmatic powerhouse, Naruto, a figure who had occupied her thoughts for days, and in his arms, a small, trembling, half-clothed demi-human girl who was clearly a victim. Her orders were to contain the disturbance, to restore order. But her eyes saw something else entirely. By order of the guild and the Loki Familia, Ice stated, her voice as clear and cold as a winter morning. Though her heart was a maelstrom of conflict. Cease your actions. Surrender the girl. Naruto didn't flinch. He held the trembling Haruhime closer, positioning his body to shield her completely. He looked past the sword, past the duty, and directly into Ice Wallenstein's conflicted, golden eyes. His own sage-enhanced gaze seemed to pierce through her, seeing the girl beneath the soldier. His voice, when he spoke, was not a shout. It was quiet, yet it resonated across the entire courtyard with the weight of absolute, unshakable authority. This girl is a victim, not a piece of evidence. This was a rescue, not an act of war. He took a single, deliberate step forward. You have a choice, Sword Princess. You can help me give her sanctuary, or you can become another one of her captors. But you will not stop me. He paused, letting the weight of the ultimatum settle. Stand aside. Ice stood frozen, her sword halfway raised. Her duty, her orders, our entire black and white world of rules and levels, had just crashed headlong into a man who operated by a different, more powerful law. A man holding a broken girl, daring her to become the villain of the story. The standoff held, charged and silent, a universe of possibilities balanced on the edge of her blade. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Sage's Respite. The world held its breath in the cold, pre-dawn air of the courtyard. The command, "Stand aside," hung between Naruto and Ice, not as a challenge, but as a statement of fact, a tectonic plate of one worldview grinding against another. Ice Wallenstein, the Sword Princess. The pride of the Loki Familia, a prodigy whose life was a straight, narrow path toward greater strength, was frozen. Her sword, an extension of her will, felt impossibly heavy. Her duty was clear: contain the threat, secure the assets, restore order. But her eyes saw the undeniable truth. A broken, terrified girl being shielded by a man whose power was matched only by the sheer, unshakable conviction radiating from him. It was Tiona who broke the spell. Her mind, unburdened by the complex calculus of politics or duty, saw the simple, human equation. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Ice's sword arm. "Ice," she said, her usually boisterous voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Look at her. Just look. She's terrified. Whatever those Ishtar pigs were doing to her, this wasn't a crime. This was a mercy." Her gaze shifted to Naruto, her eyes wide with something akin to awe. He saved her. A real hero saves people. That's the most important rule, isn't it? Tiona's words were the key. They were the permission Ice didn't know she needed, the justification to align her actions with the rebellion taking place in her own heart. The tension in her shoulders eased. She lowered desperate, the tip dipping towards the cobblestones. "My orders are to contain this situation," she stated, her voice still stiffly formal, but the edge of confrontation was gone. "We will observe. We will escort you to ensure the girl is brought to a place of safety." Naruto saw the concession for what it was, a monumental act of insubordination from a girl who had likely never defied an order in her life. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect. "She doesn't need an escort of armed guards. That would only frighten her more. She needs a sanctuary, not a new prison. Follow from a distance, if you must. Report back to your goddess that the girl is safe and the threat is neutralized." He didn't wait for a reply. With a final look at the conflicted sword princess, he turned. Ryuu, who had been ready to fight a desperate battle against a force she knew they couldn't defeat, fell into step beside him. Cradling the light, trembling weight of Haruhime, Naruto walked away from the Loki Familia. Out of the smoking ruins of the Ishtar Palace's authority, and into the nascent light of a new day. He left behind a courtyard in chaos and a golden-haired girl questioning the very foundations of her world. Ryuu led them through the city's waking arteries. She moved with a familiar purpose, navigating a labyrinth of forgotten alleyways and quiet, tree-lined streets that Naruto would never have found on any map. The rising sun was beginning to burn away the gray overcast, and shafts of golden light lanced through the gaps between buildings, promising a warmer day. They were moving away from the city's bustling heart, towards the old, quiet northwestern district, a place where time seemed to flow a little slower. Their destination was a high stone wall, so completely overgrown with ancient, blooming wisteria that it looked more like a natural feature than a man-made structure. The air here was sweet with the scent of the purple blossoms. Ryuu pushed open a heavy, iron-bound wooden door that was concealed within the foliage, its hinges groaning in protest. "An old safe house," she explained, her voice soft. "It belonged to my familia. No one has used it in 5 years. It's not on any guild registry." They stepped inside and closed the door, shutting out the city entirely. They were in a small, enclosed garden, wild and overgrown, but peaceful. In its center stood a small, single-story house built in a simple, rustic style, with dark wood beams and a slate roof. It was a haven, a pocket of silence and solitude hidden in plain sight. Inside, the air was cool and still, thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and dried herbs. Motes of dust danced in the beams of light slanting through the grimy windows. The furniture, a few sturdy wooden chairs, a large table, a sagging couch, was covered in white cloths, like ghosts of a former life. It was a place of memories, heavy with a long-abated grief, but it felt undeniably safe. Naruto gently, reverently, placed Haruhime down on the couch. She immediately curled into a tight ball, pulling one of the dusty cloths over herself like a shield, her small frame racked with silent tremors. For a long moment, the three of them simply existed in the quiet stillness of the forgotten house. The adrenaline of the battle, the tension of the standoff, the frantic energy of the escape, it all began to drain away, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep weariness. Naruto looked around the dusty room, then at the two broken souls who had, through a twist of fate, become his responsibility. He felt the weight of it, not as a burden, but as a purpose. He was a survivor, a creature of the wild. And in the wild, the first step after a storm was to secure the den. He rolled up his sleeves. "Ryuu," he said, his voice startlingly practical in the quiet room. "Where can I find a broom? And firewood? This place needs to be aired out. It needs warmth." Ryuu, pulled from her own melancholy thoughts, blinked at him. She had been bracing for the difficult questions, the grim post-mortem of their mission. Instead, he was asking about housekeeping. The sheer domesticity of it was so unexpected it almost made her laugh. She pointed towards a small pantry. There should be supplies in there. And a well in the garden for water. While Ryuu opened the windows, letting fresh, wisteria-scented air and sunlight pour into the dusty rooms. Naruto set to work. He moved with a quiet, methodical competence that was as impressive as his combat prowess. He swept the floors, started a fire in the stone hearth with practiced ease, and drew fresh water from the well. He was not a commander directing an operation, he was a caretaker, slowly and patiently turning this house of ghosts back into a home. He was breathing life back into the space, one simple, practical act at a time. The process was slow, a quiet ritual of restoration. The centerpiece of this ritual was the care of Haruhime. She remained on the couch, a small, unmoving lump of terror. Naruto knew that healing a spirit was a far more delicate operation than healing a body. It required patience, not power. After cleaning the small, functional kitchen, he found a small cache of preserved vegetables and grains in the pantry. He began to prepare a meal, his hands moving with the deftness of someone long accustomed to making something from nothing. The rhythmic, soothing sound of a knife chopping vegetables on a wooden board filled the house. Soon, the savory aroma of a simple, nourishing soup began to displace the smell of dust, a scent of life and sustenance. When the soup was ready, he poured a bowl and brought it over to the living area. Haruhime flinched as he approached, pressing herself deeper into the couch. Naruto stopped a respectful 10 feet away. He didn't try to coax her, didn't use a soft, placating voice. He simply placed the steaming bowl on a small, low table within her reach. "Eat when you're ready," he said quietly. Then he sat on the floor by the fire, a good distance away, and began to eat his own bowl in a comfortable, unthreatening silence. He was offering her not just food, but a choice. He was returning a piece of her agency, a luxury she hadn't known for years. Ryuu watched this silent, patient exchange, her heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. She had seen this man dismantle a high-level adventurer with terrifying precision. She had seen him command an army of himself to bring a powerful familia to its knees. Now, she was watching him patiently wait for a traumatized girl to eat a bowl of soup. The two images, the warrior and the caretaker, didn't conflict. They fused into a single, coherent picture of who he was, a man of immense power, guided by an even greater gentleness. In the warm, firelit safety of her old home, Ryuu felt the thick, icy walls she had built around her own heart begin to thaw, just a little. "I have never seen anyone fight the way you did against Freya," she said, her voice soft in the quiet room. It was controlled. You weren't trying to destroy her. You were just taking her apart. Naruto swallowed a mouthful of soup, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "There are many ways to be strong," he replied, his voice thoughtful. "Not all of them involve hitting things as hard as you can. Sometimes, the greatest strength is knowing exactly where to apply the least amount of pressure." He glanced over at her. "You were good, too. You held off a dozen of her personal guard by yourself." Praise from him, simple and direct, felt more meaningful than any accolade she had ever received. A faint warmth spread through her chest. They were clumsy, she deflected out of habit. Maybe, he conceded, but you were not. Their quiet companionship was a balm. The silence stretched, comfortable and easy, and then, there was a small sound from the couch. Hesitantly, a small, trembling hand reached out from under the dusty cloth. It paused, then darted out, to snatch the bowl of soup before retreating back into its cocoon of fabric. Naruto didn't acknowledge it with a look, but a small, satisfied smile touched his lips. It was a victory, the first of many they would need. An hour later, as a fragile peace began to settle over the house, it was shattered by a sharp, insistent knocking at the front door. Ryuu was on her feet instantly, her hand moving to the hilt of a sword that wasn't there. Naruto simply sighed, a long-suffering sound, and went to the door. Aina Tool stood on the doorstep, looking flustered, furious, and utterly exhausted. Her normally pristine uniform was rumpled, and her hair had a few stray strands escaping from its severe bun. She had clearly come straight from the guild. "There you are," she all but shouted, before seeming to remember herself and lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "Do you have any idea what you have done? The Ishtar Familia has been forcibly disbanded by emergency order of the guild. Their assets are frozen, their members are being detained, and their captain is in a full-body paralysis that our best healers can't explain. You didn't just attack a familia, you decapitated it. There is a P.O.R. vacuum in the entertainment district that could lead to an all-out gang war. The political firestorm you've started." Her tirade was cut short as her eyes moved past Naruto and into the room. She saw the crackling fire, the quiet elf, and the small, huddled form on the couch. Her gaze softened, the fury in her eyes draining away, replaced by something much more complicated. "This was not about politics," Naruto said calmly, stepping aside to let her see more clearly. "It was about her." Aina stepped inside, her professional anger warring with her innate sense of justice. She saw Haruhime properly then, a child swimming in a dusty blanket, her eyes wide with a terror that no amount of bureaucracy could justify. Aina's shoulders slumped, the weight of her fury replaced by the weary weight of the world's ugliness. "The guild will need her testimony," she said, her voice now quiet and resigned. "When she's ready," she added, the words feeling wholly inadequate. She looked at Naruto, at T. His impossible man who solved problems by creating even bigger ones, who operated on a moral plane that seemed to bypass all written law. "The guild doesn't know what to do with you, Naruto. You're a force of nature. And you terrify them." She turned and left without another word, her mind a tangled mess of broken regulations and grudging respect. The peace that followed lasted a grand total of 10 minutes. This time, the arrival was heralded by a booming knock that sounded more like someone was trying to take the door off its hinges. Naruto opened it to find Tiona Hiryut, vibrating with enough energy to power a small city. Tiona stood behind her, looking apologetic and long-suffering. "I found you," Tiona bellowed, grinning from ear to ear. "Ice told us where to look. That was the most incredible, most amazing, most epic thing I have ever seen. You were all like swoosh and bam, and then the Toad Lady was just a statue. You took down a whole familia. You're a bigger hero than the ones in my books." She burst into the house, her sheer, unadulterated enthusiasm a stark contrast to Aina's stressed demeanor. She saw Haruhime on the couch and her face softened with a genuine, if overwhelming, sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, plopping down on the floor near the couch. "Don't you worry, you're safe now. When you're feeling better, we'll go beat up some more bad guys together. And I'll teach you how to arm wrestle." Quote. Haruhime flinched back from the sudden explosion of energy, but Tiona's intentions were so guilelessly good-natured that it was impossible to be truly afraid of her. Tiona apologized for her sister's lack of subtlety, while Tiona proceeded to pester Naruto for every detail of the fight, her eyes sparkling with hero worship. Her presence was loud and chaotic, but it was also a gust of fresh, clean air, blowing away the last of the stagnant grief that had clung to the house. Evening had fallen by the time the Hiryut sisters finally departed. A deep, peaceful quiet settled over the safe house once more. The fire crackled and popped, casting a warm, orange glow on the three figures sitting in the main room. Ryuu was tending to the fire. Naruto was penning one of his kunai with a whetstone, the rhythmic shing-shing a soothing, meditative sound. Haruhime sat on the couch, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes watching the flames. The storm was over. For now, they were safe. They were a strange, fractured trio, a vigilante, a sage, and a songbird, but in the warmth of the fire, they felt like something more. Haruhime looked from the fire to Naruto's focused expression. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She tried again, her voice a tiny, fragile whisper, the sound of a wind chime in a gentle breeze. Thank you. Naruto stopped his sharpening. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers. He offered her a small, genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and filled them with a profound, gentle warmth. You're welcome, Haruhime, he said. In response, Haruhime offered him a smile of her own. It was small, it was hesitant, it was as fragile as a butterfly's wing. But it was real. Ryuu watched them, her own lips curving into a smile she didn't even realize was there. The cold, empty space in her chest, a void left 5 years ago, was now filled with a strange, unfamiliar warmth. It felt, she thought, a lot like hope. It felt a lot like home. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Stillness and the Sword. The passage of days brought a fragile, tentative peace to the wisteria-covered house. It was a peace measured not in grand events, but in small, quiet victories. It was the first time Haruhime emerged from her blanketed cocoon to sit by the fire on her own volition. It was the sound of her soft footsteps as she helped Ryuu sweep the floors. Her movements shy and uncertain. It was the quiet, shared meals where silence was no longer a wall of fear, but a comfortable space of mutual recovery. Ryuu, the ever-vigilant guardian, found her own hardened edges softening in the domestic rhythm, her role shifting from warrior to older sister. For Naruto, however, the house, for all its newfound warmth, was beginning to feel like a cage. He was a creature of the open sky and the deep earth, and the constant, chaotic hum of Orario's ambient energy was a grating noise at the edge of his senses, a psychic tinnitus that left him feeling drained and disconnected. He needed stillness. He needed to touch the natural world again, to sink his roots back into the earth and recalibrate his soul. Leaving Haruhime in Ryuu's capable care, he began to explore the city's periphery. He sought out the forgotten parks, the quiet riverbanks, the patches of old-growth forest that stubbornly resisted the city's sprawl. It was during one of these excursions that he found it, a perfect sanctuary. Miles from the city's northwestern wall, nestled in a small, hidden valley, was a tranquil clearing fed by a tall, slender waterfall that added down a moss-covered cliff face into a crystal-clear pool. The air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of damp stone and pine, and the only sound was the constant, soothing rush of the water. Here, the chaotic noise of the city was a distant memory. Here, he could finally breathe. He made it his own, a place of meditation to which he returned each day. He was sitting on a flat, sun-warmed boulder beside the pool, deep in a meditative state, when he felt a presence. It was quiet, incredibly so, a deliberate attempt at stealth that would have been invisible to any normal senses. But to his own, it was like a whisper in a silent room. He didn't open his eyes. He knew who it was. The soul's hue was unmistakable. A windswept, brilliant gold, though today it was tinged with uncertainty and a quiet, desperate resolve. Your tracking skills have improved, Sword Princess, he said, his voice calm. Ice Wallenstein stepped out from the cover of the ancient trees. She had shed her gleaming armor for a simple, practical tunic and trousers, an outfit for training, not for war. She had not found him by asking Ryuu, nor by following him from the safe house. She had respected their sanctuary. Instead, she had tracked him as she would a monster in the dungeon, following the faintest of signs. A bent twig, a scuffed patch of moss, the faint echo of his unique energy that he left in his wake. She stood before him, her usual impassive mask firmly in place, but she couldn't hide the conflict in her golden eyes. It had taken her 3 days to work up the courage to do this, 3 days her every waking thought being consumed by the man who had upended her world. How did you know I was here? She asked, her voice a soft breath of air. Everything that moves makes a sound, Naruto replied, finally opening his eyes to look at her. You've just learned to make yours very quiet. He waited. He knew she hadn't tracked him all this way for a casual chat. Ice clenched her fists at her sides. The picture of a warrior steeling herself for a different kind of battle. Your strength, she began, the words coming out in a quiet rush, as if she were afraid they would escape if she hesitated. It's quiet. It's still. Mine is loud. It's a storm. It's all I've ever known. She took a deep breath, her pride warring with her desperation. Teach me. The two words hung in the air, a plea of profound vulnerability. Naruto studied her, his gaze seeing beyond the legendary sword princess to the lonely, driven girl beneath. He saw the hollow ache behind her eyes, the desperate, all-cons. Hunger for a power she believed would grant her peace. He had no desire for students, no wish to become entangled with the politics of a powerful familia. But the raw sincerity in her request, he genuine desire not just for power but for understanding, resonated with him. He saw a kindred spirit, another soul burdened by a singular, overwhelming purpose. I can't teach you how to fight, he said slowly. You already know how to do that better than almost anyone in this city. He rose from the boulder, standing to face her. But I can teach you how to listen. And so, the lessons began. They were unlike any training Ice had ever known. There were no sparring dummies, no clashing of steel, no discussion of strategy or technique. There was only stillness. Their first lesson was by the waterfall. Sit, Naruto instructed. Close your eyes, and just listen. Ice did as she was told, sinking into a cross-legged position on the mossy ground. She closed her eyes and was immediately assaulted by the tempest of her own mind. Thoughts of the black dragon, critiques of her own fighting form, the faces of her fallen comrades, the memory of the standoff in the courtyard, it was a raging storm. The sound of the waterfall was just noise, a backdrop to her inner chaos. I can't, she said after several frustrating minutes. My mind is too loud. Don't try to silence the storm, Naruto's calm voice instructed from nearby. That's like trying to fight the ocean. Just listen to it, acknowledge each thought, each memory, and then let it go. Let it flow past you like the water in that stream. Eventually, you will hear what's underneath. She tried again. This time, she didn't fight the thoughts. She let them come, observing them without judgment. Slowly, painstakingly, the roar began to subside. And underneath it, she began to hear, not just the crashing water, but the subtleties within it. The gurgle of the stream over pebbles, the hiss of the mist, the deep, resonant thrum of the cascade hitting the pool. For a single, fleeting moment, she felt the vibration of the waterfall not with her ears, but with her entire body. It was a tiny breakthrough, but it left her breathless. Their second lesson was about balance. Naruto led her to a massive, fallen log that bridged a narrow ravine. Show me your katas, he said. On the flat ground of the clearing, her forms were flawless. A blur of motion so perfect it looked like a dance. But when she tried to replicate them on the narrow, uneven surface of the log, her perfection vanished. She wobbled, her movements becoming stiff and cautious. You are trying to impose your balance on the log, Naruto observed. You need to borrow the log's balance instead. He gestured for her to take off her boots. Feel the wood. Become a tree. Grow roots from the soles of your feet down into the earth. Don't stand on the world. Be a part of it. She followed his instruction, the rough, damp bark a strange sensation under her feet. She began her katas again. This time focusing not on the movements of her blade, but on the connection between her body and the log. Her movements were slower, more deliberate, but her balance was true. Shish. E was no longer a fighter performing a drill. She was a part of the forest, as stable and as centered as the ancient trees around her. Their third lesson was the most difficult. It took place in the deepest part of the woods, where the canopy blocked out most of an afternoon sun. He gave her a strip of black cloth. Blindfold yourself. Once her vision was gone, her world became one of sound, scent, and touch. I am going to move around you. Naruto's voice came from somewhere to her left. I am not going to attack you. Your task is to point to where I am at all times. At first, she was hopelessly lost. He was utterly silent. She strained her ears, trying to catch the snap of a twig, the rustle of a leaf, but heard nothing. She felt a growing sense of frustration, of helplessness. You're using your ears, his voice said. Now from behind her. It made her jump. Your ears can be deceived. Sound can be silenced. Stop listening for me, and start feeling for my absence. Feel the space I displace. Feel the subtle pressure my presence puts on the air around you. She calmed her breathing, trying to follow his abstract instruction. She extended her senses, trying to feel the world as he did. It was a sea of emptiness. But then, a flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible disturbance to her right. A feeling like a subtle shift in air pressure. She pointed. Here, she whispered. She heard a soft chuckle. Better. During these strange, quiet lessons, they talked. Ice, in clipped, hesitant sentences, spoke of her parents, of the black dragon, of the gnawing emptiness that drove her. Shish. He had never spoken of it so openly to anyone, not even Riveria. But Naruto didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just listened. In return, he shared allegories, stories of a far-off land without mentioning names or places. He spoke of a dear friend who had been consumed by a quest for vengeance, losing himself in the darkness. He spoke of a village that had feared him, of the burden of being seen as a monster when all he wanted was to be seen as a person. In his stories, Ice heard the echoes of her own pain, her own loneliness, and felt a profound, unspoken understanding pass between them. He wasn't just teaching her to be a better warrior, he was showing her how to be a whole person. A bond was forming, woven from threads of mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and a quiet, growing intimacy that was entirely new to them both. They were finishing a session on a cool evening, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. A rare, peaceful silence had settled between them. Ice felt more centered, more present, than she had in years. It was in this moment of tranquility that the world violently intruded. Naruto, who had been leaning against a tree, suddenly went rigid. The placid calm on his face vanished, replaced by a look of lethal focus. His sage mode, which had been humming at a low, ambient level, flared to life, the orange pigmentation stark around his eyes in the twilight. Killing intent, he said, his voice a low, cold whip crack. 3 of them, strong, 100 meters that way. He pointed towards a parkway path that wound its way back towards the city. The target is a civilian. They didn't need to discuss it. They moved as one. They flowed through the trees, their feet making no sound on the carpet of pine needles. They emerged at the edge of the parkway to see a scene silhouetted against the last rays of the sun. A portly, well-dressed man, a guild official Naruto recognized from the administrative floor, was walking home, humming to himself. From the deep shadows of the trees on either side of the path, 3 figures in black, form-fitting gear materialized, short, curved daggers in their hands. Naruto and Ice intercepted them. It wasn't a battle, it was a collision. Ice, her sword seeming to leap into her hand, became a golden blur. But her charge was different now. Her feet were rooted, her center of gravity perfect. She didn't just rush forward, she flowed. Her attack a devastatingly precise arc that seemed to be an extension of the natural world around her. She met the first assassin's lunge with a parry that was so perfect. Lee balanced it, sent him stumbling off balance, open for a disabling strike to the shoulder from the flat of her blade. Naruto was a shadow on the other side. He moved between the remaining 2 assassins, his hands a blur. One of them lunged, and Naruto simply sidestepped, his hand chopping down on the man's extended wrist with a sickening crack of bone. The second assassin, seeing his partner fall, tried to retreat. But Naruto was already there, a single, precise finger jab to a pressure point in his neck causing the man's eyes to roll back as he collapsed, unconscious. The synergy between them was terrifyingly perfect. They fought back to back without ever needing to speak, instinctively aware of the other's position and intent. The fight was over in less than 10 seconds. The guild official, who had just realized he was about to be attacked, could only stare in wide-eyed shock at his 2 saviors and the 3 disabled assassins lying at their feet. "We need to question them," Ice said, her voice sharp with adrenaline. But as she approached the first assassin, the one she had struck down, the man's lips curled into a strange, fanatical smile. He bit down hard. A faint gurgle, a shudder, and he went limp. A trickle of black foam spilling from his lips. The other 2, even the unconscious one, began to convulse as well, their bodies arching in a final, agonizing spasm before falling still. Coordinated, magically triggered poison. Cowards, Ice spat, frustrated. Naruto knelt beside the first body, his expression grim. He noticed something on the back of the man's neck, a SMA. LL tattoo that had been partially hidden by his high collar. He pushed the fabric aside. It was a stylized, weeping eye, its pupil a downward-pointing tear. The eye was entwined with a thorny, black vine. Naruto didn't know the organization's name, but he recognized the symbology. It was the mark of a death cult, of those who worshipped oblivion. It was the mark of an old, deep sickness in the world. They stood there in the deepening twilight, over the bodies of 3 fanatics, the rescued official stammering his thanks behind them. The quiet sanctuary of their training ground felt a world away, its peace shattered by the cold, hard reality of a hidden war that had just declared itself. Their private lessons had ended. A very public, very deadly final exam had just begun. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Whispers from the Abyss. The guild's secure debriefing room was a place devoid of comfort, designed for the stark and often brutal truths of the world. The air was cool and still, and the only light came from a single, steady mage-light crystal in the ceiling, casting long shadows from the room's sparse furniture. Naruto, Ice, and the visibly shaken guild official sat on one side of a heavy stone table. On the other side sat the grim-faced leadership of the Loki Familia's old guard, Finn Diemny and Gareth Landrock, alongside a pale and overworked Aina Tool, her hands clasped tightly around a fresh file. He sketched this from memory, Aina said, her voice tight with professionalism as she pushed a piece of parchment across the table. On it was Naruto's perfect, clean-lined drawing of the tattoo. Finn picked it up, his small frame belying the immense gravity he possessed. He studied the image, his thumb tracing the thorny vine. Gareth leaned over, his one good eye narrowing. The vile warmth the dwarf usually radiated had vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stillness that was far more intimidating. Evelus, Gareth growled, the name a curse dredged up from a dark, bloody history. I haven't seen this mark in 15 years. The weeping eye, Finn added, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. A particularly fanatical sect. They weren't just soldiers, they were zealots who hipped the dungeon's destructive potential. They believed the only path to true salvation was the world's utter destruction, a great cleansing that would return everything to the abyss. He placed the parchment down, his gaze heavy. We thought we had exterminated them all after the fall of their god. Aina's face was ashen. Then this wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a statement, a resurgence, a ghost from the past. Finn corrected, his eyes finding Naruto's. And they've chosen a very strange time to reappear, just as a new, powerful variable has entered the city. The implication was clear. Naruto's arrival and the subsequent fall of the Ishtar Familia had created a ripple, and something ancient and ugly had stirred in the depths in response. The guild was placed on a clandestine high alert. Finn and Gareth began mobilizing their contacts, digging into old records, hunting for whispers of a ghost they thought long buried. They chose not to make a public announcement, fearing a citywide panic over what could still, however unlikely, be an isolated incident. It was a logical, prudent decision. And it would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation. 2 days later, Orario was basking in the lazy warmth of a mid-afternoon sun. It was a day of deceptive peace. At the wisteria-covered safe house, Haruhime was taking a tentative step into her new life, helping Ryuu tend to the overgrown but beautiful garden. A small, genuine smile graced her lips as she successfully pruned a rose bush, the simple act of nurturing life a powerful antidote to her past. In Twilight Manor, Tiona was engaged in a loud, one-sided argument with Bet about the proper way to cook a steak, her boisterous laughter echoing through the halls. And at her desk in the guild, surrounded by dusty, forgotten archives, Aina Tool was painstakingly cross-referencing old reports, trying to find a pattern in the faded ink of a forgotten war. The city's warning bells began to toll at 3:17 p.m. It started not with a single alarm, but with a dozen, then 100, a cacophony of panicked ringing that spread across Orario like a virus. The eruption was brutally synchronized, a masterwork of malevolent planning. In the bustling market district, a massive iron sewer grate flew 100 feet into the air as if shot from a cannon. From the dark, gaping hole poured a chittering tide of giant, blade-limbed killer ants. In the artisan's quarter, a swarm of venomous, bat-like vespids flooded from the drainage systems, their buzzing wings creating a sound like tearing silk. Hellhounds, goblins, war shadows, a tide of monstrous filth. Captured and smuggled into the city's underbelly, now poured into the streets from a score of different locations. Chaos was instantaneous. The mundane P.O.F. The afternoon shattered into a million pieces of screaming terror. The guild was inundated, its communication crystals lighting up like a mad god switchboard, painting a picture of a city under siege from within. The Ganesha Familia, Orario's dedicated peacekeepers, deployed to the heavily populated eastern sectors. Loki, sensing a coordinated military action, sent her main force, including Finn and Gareth, to secure the northern gates and the area around Babel. The city's strongest defenders were pinned down, drawn into heavy combat against a multi-fronted invasion. And in the quiet, northwestern residential district, an area deemed low priority, the whispers from the abyss found their true target. Naruto felt it a full 3 seconds before the eruption. He was meditating in the garden, trying to teach Haruhime the basics of feeling the life in the plants around her. Suddenly, his head snapped up, his sage mode flaring to life unbidden. He felt a wave of malevolent, coordinated intent surging up from beneath the earth. A network of hate and hunger spreading through the sewer lines. Ryuu, inside, now, he yelled. Just as Ryuu pulled a bewildered Haruhime towards the house, the cobblestone street 100 yards away exploded upwards. A horde of monsters, primarily hulking, brutish orcs and nimble, spear-wielding lizardmen, clawed their way into the sunlight, their roars echoing in the tranquil neighborhood. Among them, Naruto could sense the cold, detached presence of several cloaked figures, their life forces dim and tainted, the Evolus agents directing the swarm. This was no random attack. They were here for the safe house. They're using the monsters to screen their advance, Ryuu said, her face grim as she peered through the window, her mind instantly shifting into tactical mode. They'll surround the house and use the chaos to breach our defenses. Then we won't let them get close, Naruto stated, his voice a blade of cold steel. He looked at Ryuu, then at Haruhime, who was trembling. Her newfound peace shattered. Stay here, Haruhime. We will protect you. Before either of them could move, the sound of running footsteps approached, not from the direction of the monsters, but from deeper in the city. Tiona Hiryut, her massive double-bladed axe, Urga, already in her hands, skidded to a halt in their garden, a wide, feral grin on her face. I heard a party was starting. Figured you guys might be the guests of honor. Moments later, a golden blur resolved into the form of Ice Wallenstein, her own sword drawn. Her face was a mask of cold fury. They're targeting the entire city, she stated, her eyes meeting Naruto's. Her presence wasn't a question, it was a declaration. I am here to fight. The team had assembled. Ryuu, the layout, Naruto commanded, immediately taking charge. Give us choke points, defensible positions. The street narrows 200 yards west, Ryuu said instantly, her mind a map of the area. It's a bottleneck, perfect for a frontline defense. The rooftops on either side give us a clear line of sight for ranged support. Good. Tiona, you're the wall. Hold that bottleneck. Don't let a single one through, Naruto ordered. Tiona's grin widened. You don't have to tell me twice. She hefted Urga and charged down the street, her war cry a joyous, bloodthirsty roar. She met the first wave of orcs head-on, her massive axe a whirlwind of destruction, cleaving through flesh and bone with contemptuous ease. Ice, Naruto continued, you're our surgical strike. Anything big or fast that gets past Tiona is your target. Prioritize the lizardman spear throwers. They're the biggest threat to Ryuu on the roofs. Ice nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, and blurred away, a golden missile aimed at the heart of the enemy flank. Ryuu, you're on the roofs. Take out the casters, Naruto said, pointing to a cloaked figure in the back ranks who was chanting, causing the ground to tremble. You have the best vantage point. Understood, Ryuu said, and with the grace of a cat, she was gone, scaling the wall and flowing onto the rooftops. Naruto created 24 shadow clones. Spread out, he told them. Plug any gaps. Protect the civilians. Harass their commanders. The clones scattered, a silent, disciplined force that melted into the chaos. He, the original, stood in the garden, his eyes closed, his senses spread across the entire battlefield. He was the nerve center, the commander, watching the entire battle unfold in his mind's eye. Ice, 2 lizardmen climbing the building to your left. Ryuu. The caster is shielded. But his guard on the right has a weak stance. Tiona. Incoming orc charge, brace yourself. He fed them perfect, real-time intelligence, his voice calm and steady in their minds via a thin, almost undetectable thread of wind element chakra that carried the sound. The battle was a symphony of disparate, perfectly harmonized violence. Tiona was a force of nature, a laughing, screaming bulwark of joyous destruction, holding back the tide of green skin. Ice was a phantom of death, her blade flashing in the sun, every movement a testament to her training with Naruto, centered, powerful, and ruthlessly efficient. She danced through the battle, felling the strongest monsters with single, perfect strikes. From the rooftops, Ryuu was a silent, avenging spirit. Arrows of light, her elven magic, rained down with pinpoint accuracy, disrupting enemy formations and silencing a second Evolus agent with a shot through the throat. But the enemy was numerous, and their leaders were cunning. They began to focus their fire on Tiona, trying to overwhelm her with sheer numbers. A massive, club-wielding orc captain, larger and more intelligent than the rest, broke through the line, charging directly towards the safe house. Inside, Haruhime watched through the window, her knuckles white, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Tiona stagger under a heavy blow. She saw a new wave of lizardmen preparing to overwhelm Ice. She saw Ryuu forced to take cover from a volley of spears. They were fighting for her. They were protecting her. And she was hiding, useless, a fragile doll in a house that was about to be overrun. The memory of Naruto's patient smile, of Ryuu's quiet companionship, of Tiona's clumsy but genuine kindness, rose up in her mind. These people had given her some things she thought she had lost forever, a home, a family, and the thought of losing it, of seeing them hurt because she was too afraid to act, was suddenly more terrifying than any memory of Freya or Ishtar. A new fire, a fierce, protective inferno, burned away the last vestiges of her fear. She would not be a nightingale in a cage. Not anymore. She ran out into the garden, her small frame trembling not with fear, but with a new, unshakable resolve. Her hands came together. Her voice, no longer a whisper but a clear, ringing command, chanted the words of power. Here and now, I weave the threads of fate. O ye heroes of fleeting fame, let my name be the wellspring of your power. She raised her hands, her eyes glowing with a brilliant golden light. Uchide no Kozuchi, a wave of warm, golden light erupted from her, a visible manifestation of hope and power. It washed over her allies, sinking into their skin. Tiona roared as she felt a surge of strength, her muscles swelling with new power. Ice felt her speed double, the world seeming to slow down around her. Ryuu felt her magical reserves refill, her senses sharpening to a razor's edge. It was a level boost, a legendary magic used not out of coercion, but out of love and a desperate will to protect. The tide of the battle turned instantly. Tiona, laughing maniacally, shattered the orc captain's club and sent him flying with a single blow. Ice became an untouchable phantom, dispatching the remaining lizardmen before they could even register her presence. Ryuu unleashed a volley of powerful light arrows that decimated the enemy's back ranks. Naruto, watching through his sage sense, felt the surge of her power as a wave of pure, benevolent warmth. He smiled. The songbird had found her voice. And it was a battle cry. He turned his own attention to the final, primary Evolus commander, who was now trying to retreat in the face of their empowered assault. Naruto blurred, appearing directly in the man's path. The agent, startled, unleashed a torrent of dark, corrosive magic. Naruto simply held up a hand, a swirling, compressed sphere of pure wind chakra forming in his palm. The Rasengan met the dark magic and annihilated it. Before the agent could even scream, Naruto was on him, a precise chop to the neck rendering him unconscious. The battle was over. The remaining monsters, their leadership gone, broke and fled, only to be cut down by Naruto's waiting clones. Silence descended upon the street, a street now littered with the corpses of monsters. The team gathered, bruised, panting, but victorious. They stood together under the afternoon sun. A strange and unlikely group. A sage, an elf, a sword princess, an Amazon, and a fox. Tiona gently clapped Haruhime on the back. Wow, Foxy, you were amazing. You're our secret weapon. Haruhime, for the first time, didn't flinch. She stood a little taller, a proud, exhausted smile on her face. Ice gave Naruto a look of profound, wordless respect. Their training had been theory. This had been the application. Ryuu simply stood beside Naruto, their shared victory a bond stronger than any words. They looked down at the unconscious Evolus agent at their feet. The whispers from the abyss had become a roar. But now, they had an answer. And they had a lead. They were no longer a collection of individuals. They were a team, a family, and their war had just begun. Chapter 8 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.